The moment I caught Brittany with Donovan, my life spiraled into chaos. In Hawaii, I intercepted a mysterious phone call hinting at a plot against me. My brother Taylor's involvement cut deeper than any wound. My mother's manipulation and favoritism pushed me to the edge. Every day felt like a struggle against the people I once loved. Brittany's deceit, Taylor's schemes, Donovan's violent threats. They were all against me. One night, I faced a deadly confrontation with Donovan, a gun in his hand, and secrets ready to be spilled. How do you find strength when everyone conspires against you? This is the story of my downfall, my revenge, my truth. Sitting at the airport this Thursday morning, I wondered why I wasn't as excited as I thought I should be. Brittany was off with my mom at Starbucks. I saw my dad wandering back to the gate where I sat. Who knows where Taylor was? It was a last-minute thing that he was even here. My dad sat down next to me and slung his arm across the back of my seat. He studied me for a moment. "What's the problem, Bob?" he asked. "You don't look like you're about to go on any vacation," he stated. He was right. My mood was less than upbeat. 9 days at a beautiful home near Mount Alani on the big island of Hawaii. Why wasn't I in a more festive mood? I'd seen the pictures on the website. Beautiful views, tropical vegetation, our own private infinity pool. What else could you ask for? "Sorry, Dad," I said. "I guess I'm just concerned about the business." I told him that statement was partially true, and then my dad went on a long, rambling explanation of why we didn't need to worry about the business. We only had 2 projects going right now, the big one with the deck, pergola, and water feature. Albert and Roman were on it. They had that under control. The other job, the McKinseys, was much smaller and simpler, just a small deck and railing job. That wasn't the problem. It was the McKinseys. They nitpicked every little detail. If it had been up to me, I would have never agreed to take on that project, but Taylor sold it, and we were stuck with it. I gazed down the concourse and saw my beautiful wife, Brittany, my mom, and my brother Taylor talking and laughing as they sipped their overpriced Starbucks beverages. No, I thought, the business wasn't the real problem. Something was off between Brittany and me. This vacation to Hawaii started off as a getaway for just the 2 of us. Then my mom got wind of it and took it over. It became a family vacation. I glanced at my big brother Taylor gliding through the airport. Not a worry in the world. He was supposed to bring his latest girlfriend, but that relationship fell apart. Then he wasn't going to go. He'd stay home and manage the business. But my mom talked him into coming solo at the last minute. To be honest, I can't say I was glad he was on the trip. Deep in thought, I didn't hear the latest boarding announcement. "Tim!" Brittany grabbed my arm. "We're boarding, come on!" She pulled me up, walking down the jetway to board. That tickle of uneasiness remained. I couldn't quite identify the source, but somehow I knew something was not quite right. School had always been difficult for me. My early memories of school were negative. Frustration and failure were the feelings I associated with school. As the other kids progressed in reading, writing, and vocabulary, I was stuck. I just couldn't read. I now know that I have dyslexia, but at the time there was no diagnosis. Some children are just slower, my teacher had said. I would notice the looks of disappointment from my mother after the latest parent-teacher conference. At one point, they talked of putting me in special education. By the time I realized this was for the mentally handicapped children, that idea had been discarded. Reading for me was slow. I ended up memorizing words. There was no way I could work anything out phonetically, so I memorized. Think about it like this. We all understand the shape and color of a stop sign, and we know what it means. That's how I would read. But as I said, it was a much slower process than regular reading. Words were symbols for me. I had to really concentrate. The idea of reading for pleasure was absurd. The backdrop to my scholastic struggles was my brother Taylor. School for him was easy, and for that matter, life for Taylor seemed easy. He was the smart kid, the star athlete, the fun one to be around. My parents were proud of Taylor and praised him often, particularly my mom. It was obvious to me even at an early age I was a disappointment to my mother. My dad was always fairly even-keeled about me and most things. Not my mother. Her children's success was the barometer that she believed she was measured by. Naturally, she gravitated to Taylor. By the time I reached high school, the disparity between my brother and me was stark. He was the popular, outgoing athlete, and I was the introverted, sullen younger brother. Don't get me wrong, I was a pretty good athlete myself, but I didn't command the same respect as my taller, charismatic older brother, Taylor. Senior year, my sophomore year, he was one of the captains of the football team. He received a scholarship to play for a small, somewhat prestigious college back east. Meanwhile, I played JV football, was on the track team, and wrestled varsity. Though my parents never missed one of Taylor's football games, my wrestling matches were rarely attended. My senior year, I placed fourth at state at 156 pounds, a fairly decent accomplishment. My dad showed up for the tournament, but not my mom. It would be hard to call Taylor and me buddies. There were times I was swept up in activities with him and the popular crowd, but it was rare that he would seek me out and invite me to participate. Within our family, Taylor was unarguably the star. I was relegated to the background. My mother was the energy in our family. She wore the pants. My easygoing dad just came along for the ride. This relationship was particularly pronounced because we had a family business, designing outdoor spaces. Originally, it was called Frank Boucher Landscaping, and my dad had run it with a few seasonal employees. When my mom got involved, it changed. We took on bigger projects, did more construction, hired more people, and expanded the scope of the business. My mom felt we needed a name that matched the scope of our business, and she was right. Certainly my mother had her weaknesses, but have no doubt she was smart and driven. Though my father was nominally listed as president of the company, my mom ran things all through high school. Taylor and I worked for DOS, designing outdoor spaces on weekends, vacations, and during the summer. I liked the work. My reading challenges shaped how I learned things. I paid close attention and focused on the goal. This helped me in the family business. It was one of the few areas where I was better than Taylor. When we worked together, it was always a competition, who could do things faster, who was stronger, and so on. It wasn't long before I started beating Taylor regularly. This made him angry. His younger, smaller brother was doing better than him. He said my better work was because it was blue-collar. He thought he was more of a white-collar guy and said the work was below him. The summer I graduated, Taylor stayed back east for an internship. I worked for the family business that summer. I have to admit, I felt far less stress with Taylor not around. My plan was to go to community college in the fall and keep working at the family business. By the end of the summer, I was running a crew by myself. My dad ran the landscaping crew, and Roman, our grouchy long-term employee, was in charge of the construction crew. My mom ran the business from the home office. The office was in a shop on my parents' large 3-acre property. On the property was our newer family home, the large shop with the office at one end, and the original small older house that was now vacant. The land was worth a lot of money. Prime land was valuable in Central Oregon. Throughout high school, I had a few girlfriends, nothing too serious or long-term. In high school, I was always known as Taylor's little brother. So much so, I began to think of myself that way. My confidence with girls was not very high. I had several buddies from high school who went to the local community college with me. The social life was not nearly the same as the reports we got from friends who went off to the universities in the Willamette Valley. Parties multiple times a week, fraternities and sororities, football games and dances. My buddies and I were invited to these, and quite a few weekends we went over to soak in the true college experience. We would then head home, usually hungover and slightly depressed about the idea of living at home and going to the local community college. One weekend, we went to an all-campus party in Eugene at a large bar slightly out of town. It was the type of thing where you paid an entrance fee and then drank keg beer until it was gone. My buddies and I drifted apart, and I found a spot at the far end of the makeshift bar. Hanging at the bar had a couple of benefits. You didn't have to stand in a long line to get a fresh beer, and second, everyone passed by you to get their beer, so you got to see a lot of people. Of course, as a healthy 19-year-old, I was focused on women. Currently, I had no girlfriend among the many attractive co-eds. I noticed a tall blonde, maybe 15 pounds overweight or so, but her shape was proportionate. The tight yellow sweater accentuated the proportions. "Hey," I said to the blonde in yellow, "can I help you get a beer?" She stopped and looked at me, a half smile on her face. She looked me up and down, still not speaking, just looking at me. "What?" I questioned, unsure of her reaction to my simple question. "Sure," she finally said. "It will save me from all the guys trying to bump into me while waiting in line." I quickly glanced down at her and looked away. I told her to take my place at the edge of the bar and I'd get her the beer. I had gotten to know the bartender and he served me quickly. I moved back to where the blonde was and noticed some tall fraternity type talking to her. "Here you go," I said as I handed her the beer. I also stepped slightly in front of the taller guy. "Hey, pal," he said. "I was talking to Brittany. Move on." I turned and looked at him. From all my years of wrestling, I had learned how to intimidate with the right kind of look. A challenging stare that said, "Do you have the guts to take me on?" I calmly focused that look on the fraternity guy. He tried to hold my stare, but I think he saw something in me he didn't want to mess with. With a curt nod, he walked off. I looked at Brittany, and she now had an expression on her face when she looked at me. I think when she first noticed me, she saw a medium-height, lean, suntanned, average-looking guy. Now she noticed the little edge I carried. Her expression seemed a bit more pleased. "I'm Tim," I said, "and now I know your name is Brittany." I held out my hand for her to shake. She kind of giggled and shook my hand. The soft warmth of her hand contrasted with the roughness of my work-calloused hand. She held my hand a little longer than normal. "Brittany Robinson," she told me, still clasping my hand. We talked, and I learned about Brittany, and she asked about me. She was studying graphic design. She seemed slightly disappointed that I lived in Central Oregon and didn't go to school at the university. As the evening progressed, it became more crowded and louder in the rustic barn. I moved closer to Brittany so I could hear her. A bit later, I snaked an arm around her with my hand lightly holding her waist. We were in our own little cocoon of intimacy as the party raged on around us. I began wondering what the final chapter might be for this evening. On the one hand, I would love to kiss her. On the other hand, I liked her and didn't want to rush things. Shortly, an announcement was made over an electronic megaphone. The buses that had taken people to the barn were heading back to campus. "Oh, that's me," she said and looked at me. We both just kind of stood there, surprised by the abrupt ending to this pleasant evening. "Brittany," I said, "it was great to meet you." I stuttered, unsure of what to say. "Here," she said, "give me your phone." I did, and she created a new contact. "Britt." She gave me a quick hug and a kiss on the lips, then hurried off toward the buses. She glanced back once, smiling, kissed her hand, and blew me a kiss. It had been a good night. Throughout the following week, I thought about Brittany. She had a pretty face and beautiful blonde hair. She looked a little heavy, but not too much. She was definitely my type. I had classes all day Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. On Tuesday, Thursday, and occasionally Saturdays, I worked for the family business. The Tuesday after meeting Brittany, I was working on a hardscape installation in Sisters. Roman Kral was the lead on the job. Roman had worked faithfully with my dad for years. He was very good at what he did, but he could be difficult. He always treated me and even Taylor with contempt. One time in high school, Taylor and I, in a rare show of solidarity, went to our dad and demanded he get rid of Roman. Our father ignored our complaints and told us that Roman was the best employee we had. He went on to say Roman was never late, was never sick, understood the business, and was loyal. "It's either him or us," Taylor threatened. "I think McDonald's is hiring," our dad replied without looking up from his paperwork. That Tuesday, I guess I was daydreaming about Brittany, and Roman lashed out at me. "Pay attention, Prost!" he yelled as a large stack of pavers nearly fell on my foot. "You're at a job site, not in your warm home. Pay attention. It's dangerous when you're not thinking about the job." He scolded me. He pissed me off. Where did our employee get off bossing me around? Later, I got to thinking about it, and Roman was right. I or someone else could easily get hurt on the job site. I decided to apologize to Roman because I felt bad. Also, maybe he'd be a little easier on me. "Roman," I said, "sorry I messed up today." I expected some type of reply. All I got was a serious stare from Roman, that was it. Oh, well, the guy was an asshole. Later that week, I texted Brittany. I asked how her week was going and told her my buddies and I were heading to Eugene that weekend. I asked what she was up to that weekend. By Thursday night, I hadn't heard from her. My spirits got a little down, but then Friday morning she sent me a message. "Hey, big party at the Commons Saturday night. I'll wait for you. See you there." Suddenly my spirits were back up. My buddies and I planned to go to the football game on Saturday, and now we knew where the party was after. By the time we arrived at the Commons, it was a scene. The party was actually in the parking lot. Tents and canopies were set up all over the place. You paid a flat amount to get in, and they gave you a wristband for the keg beer. Once we were there, I wondered how I was ever going to find Brittany with all the people. I needn't have worried. Within 10 minutes, she found me. She greeted me with a big hug, squishing herself against me. She'd already had a few drinks, I could tell. I took a moment to look at Brittany, holding her hands and taking her in. Beautiful blonde hair, a pretty happy face, bright red lipstick. I looked at her body. Yeah, still a bit heavy, but that was okay. She was wearing a low-necked, tight, bright red top. Much of her cleavage was visible in this particular shirt. I couldn't help myself. I stared at her cleavage, probably a moment too long. "Easy, big boy," she said, noticing my stare. "Try to maintain some eye contact," she told me with a laugh. "Sorry," I replied, but nodded toward her cleavage. She laughed again, grabbed my hand, and we headed off happily into the midst of the party. We had a great time. I learned a little more about Brittany. She was majoring in graphic design with a minor in computer science. She must be smart, I thought. I knew a lot of the kids there, and everything was positive. We hung out with a group of her friends for a while, and I met a few people. As we were standing there, a bigger guy walked up and hung around the fringe of our group. Suddenly, I recognized him. He was one of the players for the university football team. His name was Donovan Mims. I remembered when my high school football team played Mims' team my junior year. Mims was from Redmond in our league and geographically close to my high school. We won, but Mims was the star. Now I looked at him, big, broad-shouldered, and muscular, about 6 feet 2 inches, 3 or 4 inches taller than me. He had the same athletic confidence that my brother Taylor carried. Just then, Brittany asked me to please go get her another beer. It took maybe 10 minutes. When I returned, I saw that she was in a discussion with Mims. As I walked up, she broke away and came back to me. He gave me a look and then walked off. "What was all that about?" I asked her. She was quiet for a moment and then just shook her head as if it was of no importance. I let it drop. The good feeling and fun of the party returned, and I forgot about that odd moment. The party wound down. It was late and the kegs were dry. Brittany and I were in a dark, fairly private corner of the parking lot. We started kissing. Both of us had quite a bit to drink, though neither of us was drunk. We continued kissing in this secluded area. "Where are you staying tonight?" she breathlessly asked me. For a moment, I wondered if this was an overnight invitation. I told her I was staying on the floor of a buddy's dorm room. "That's too bad," she said. "I don't want our first time in some dingy alley," she told me, looking around at our surroundings. "I'd get in big trouble if I try to sneak you into my sorority room," she told me. "Walk me home," she told me. We walked the dark streets of campus toward her sorority. She hugged my arm, pressing close to my side. I was pretty excited the whole walk home. Soon, we reached the large brick sorority house. We stood there hugging and kissing for a few minutes. "I guess I have to go in," she finally said. I nodded. "Call me this week," she said. "I can't wait to see you again. And next time, let's figure out this privacy thing," she added with a laugh. I was in good spirits driving home with my buddies that Sunday. It felt like something was definitely happening between me and Brittany. During the week, I heard from Brittany, and she told me where the all-campus party was for the coming weekend. I told her I'd meet her there. There was no talk about motels, sex, or privacy like last weekend, but I knew this coming weekend I wanted to get Brittany alone. I was upbeat and in an unusually outgoing mood on the drive to Eugene. That night, my two buddies and I headed to the all-campus party. This week, it was at one of the bigger fraternities. It was packed with people, but like last week, I knew Brittany would find me. I wandered around the huge house, feeling comfortable. The fraternity house had a huge main floor where most of the party was happening. It also had a large yard that was packed with people. There was a basement and a big staircase going up to the second floor. Beer in hand, I slowly made my way through the party, looking for her blonde hair. I had been there for about half an hour and still hadn't seen Brittany. I noticed a group of girls, including some of her friends I had met before. I casually approached their group. "Hey, Aaron," I said to a petite redhead. "Have you seen Brittany around?" "Brittany Robinson?" she asked. I nodded with a smile. "Yeah," she said. "I know she's here. A big group of us walked over from the sorority together. I haven't seen her lately," she added, glancing back towards the frat house. "Got it. Thanks," I told her and walked off. I decided to text Brittany. "Hey, where are you?" I sent. I kept moving through the party, wondering why I hadn't seen her. I had been through the main floor twice and checked outside. I thought I'd check outside again. I saw my two buddies with some girls outside. I began looking at the large cedar deck in the backyard of the frat house. I noticed it was poorly built, with the boards flexing under the weight of the partygoers. As I was analyzing the deck, Cody, one of the guys I drove over with, grabbed me. "Hey, I saw that chick you've been hanging out with. The blonde with the big, he said. I nodded, signaling him to continue. "She was hanging out with that guy we played football against from Redmond. He plays college ball here now. Sims, I think his name is," he told me. "Mims," I said under my breath. "Where did you see them?" I asked. "In the frat," he said, pointing back toward the house. "It looked like they were heading up to the second floor." "Okay, thanks, Cody," I told him, trying to act nonchalant. I walked inside, a mix of jealousy and anger running through me. I headed up the stairs. A long hallway led off to the left. Most of the rooms had their doors open, with people having small parties in the dorms. There were a couple of rooms with doors shut. I walked down the hallway, nodding and greeting people I knew. Still, no sign of Brittany. Near the end of the hallway, I noticed a door slightly ajar. I glanced in and saw a few people in the room. On a couch, with her blonde hair and pronounced curves, sat Brittany, locked in a passionate kiss with Donovan Mims. I pushed the door open part way and stepped inside. "There you are, Brittany," I said calmly, hiding my anger. "I tried to text you. Maybe your phone was off or you were busy," I said, making eye contact with Mims, then left. I thought about leaving, angry as I was, but then I decided to enjoy the party and maybe get a little drunk. I forced myself to be an outgoing, happy-go-lucky partier, though my anger simmered below the surface. Mad at Mims? Sure. Mad at Brittany? Definitely. But mostly, I was mad at myself. I had put too much emotion into a few casual encounters. The rest of the party was uneventful. I noticed Brittany looking my way a couple of times. I ignored her and ended up having a pretty good time. Much later, as my buddies and I were leaving, we passed within a few feet of Brittany and her sorority friends. "Timothy," she called, her voice questioning. Without turning to face her, I raised my right arm and waved. "See ya." That was the last I interacted with Brittany for quite some time. I still went to the parties in Eugene occasionally, but less often. A few times I saw her at a party or event. Most of the time, Mims was with her or close by. It seemed like they were together as a couple. Life went on, and any thoughts of Brittany or a potential relationship faded. Deep down, a small flame still burned for her, but I did my best to ignore it. 6 years later, my crew had just shown up on a large outdoor living job site in Redmond. It was me, Albert, and Jimmy, Albert's nephew. We had to remove an old cedar deck, clear some overgrown landscaping, level the ground, and then install a combination of hardscape and ground-level decking, plus add a patio cover. This was a $54,000 job. Surprisingly, this was an average job for our family business. Designed Outdoor Spaces, DOS, had grown over the last few years. No false modesty, but I think I had a lot to do with it. I made it through 1 year of community college, but classroom learning wasn't for me. I loved our family business. One of my skills was quickly looking at a job site and breaking it down into smaller tasks to reach the goal. My reading challenges turned into great organizational skills and a near photographic memory. While I wasn't as skilled a craftsman as Roman or my dad, I had other strengths. Occasionally, I'd even get a slight compliment from grouchy Roman. If we had a true corporate setup, my mom would be the CEO. She handled scheduling, finances, and marketing. My dad or I would visit customers, make sales calls, and create bids. This was my least favorite activity. After the job was sold, my mom would organize the materials and personnel. We had 3 crews. Normally, Albert and I were one. My dad specialized in landscaping and had his crew. Finally, there was Roman, our lead carpenter. Roman's craftsmanship made up for his sour moods. Occasionally, we worked together, but it was more efficient and profitable if all 3 crews worked independently. The business sat on a valuable piece of land within the urban growth boundaries. My dad's dad had originally bought the land for a few $1,000s. There was a family trust on the land to keep it in the family. The office and shop were near the main road. There was a small, run-down, currently unoccupied house near the shop. My parents had lived there when they were first married. The larger house where I grew up and where my parents still lived was up the hill. It had never quite been finished, and I was often recruited to help install trim, hang a door, or paint something. I had done a lot of work on that house over the years. When I went to community college, I bought my own house near downtown. It was small and needed a lot of work, but the price was right at the time. Over the past few years, its value had increased significantly. Another reason I bought it was to get out of my family's shadow, especially my mom's. I needed separation. I worked with them all day long, and my mom was always mentioning something positive that Taylor had accomplished. Maybe it was my imagination, but my mother always seemed slightly disappointed in me. This all went over the head of my laid-back dad. I was glad to have my own house to go back to at the end of the day. That morning, while Albert, Jimmy, and I had just about demolished the old wood deck at the job site in Redmond, my mom called. "Tim, can you run over and give a bid on a project in Pinecone Springs?" she asked. "Mom," I said, "I'm filthy and we're just about done with the tear-out." "The Eldridges are leaving for California this afternoon," she replied. "It's a big job and they want to explain their ideas to you." "Where's Dad?" I asked. "Can't he do it?" "No, they're all down in Sun Ridge," she told me. I thought, shit, I don't like this part of the job. Off I went to the address she sent me in Pinecone Springs. I was to meet Carlton Eldridge there, probably some wealthy guy. 2.5 hours later, I was back at the job in Redmond. As it turned out, Eldridge was a pretty good guy. He was an attorney and lived mainly in Silicon Valley. Obviously, he had money. He seemed friendly, and we talked a bit. I made notes, measured, and told him we would email him his bid. When I saw Jimmy and Albert, I could tell something was up. Jimmy was smiling and laughing, and Albert kept scowling at him. Fortunately, they looked like they had accomplished some things. "What's going on?" I asked Albert. Jimmy was still grinning. Albert just glanced at Jimmy and shook his head. "Stupidly," he said, nodding toward Jimmy. "Boss," Jimmy began in a loud whisper, "you gotta see next door." He pointed toward the fence on the south side. "There's a blonde chick with big, in a bikini." I glanced toward the fence. I could imagine what probably happened. Jimmy was likely up on a ladder, tearing down the old overhead structure. He would have had a great view into the neighbor's yard. Someone was probably out sitting in the sun. All perfectly harmless, unless it's the neighbor's 15-year-old daughter. Then we'd look like perverts. This would not be good for the company. "Why don't you guys break for lunch?" I told them. I decided to see if I needed to do damage control with the neighbor. Who knows what they might have seen or heard from Jimmy. I rang the doorbell of the neighbor's house. I waited. Nothing. I tried again. I was about to turn around to leave when there was movement at the door. I took a step down off the front porch. A blonde woman in large, dark sunglasses and a cover-up answered the door. "Hello, ma'am," I began. "I'm with DOS, and we're doing some work next door. I wanted to make sure we're not disturbing you." She was quiet for a moment, seeming to study me. "Timothy?" she asked, and I thought I recognized the voice. "Yes," I hesitated. She took off her sunglasses, and I realized who she was. "Brittany Robinson," I said, surprised. "Wow, it's been a while. Is this your house?" "Yes. Well, I'm house-sitting, but this is where I live," she said. "But it's now Brittany Mims, at least for about another month," she told me. I stood there for a minute, stunned by the coincidence. I hadn't seen Brittany for years, and I didn't know she lived in Central Oregon. I assumed she was married to Donovan, but the "at least for another month" part made me curious. We chatted for a few minutes, catching up. I mentioned we'd be on this job for a few weeks and that we would try not to disturb her. "Tim," she said, "don't worry, you won't disturb me." She gave me a big smile. That was an interesting comment. All day I couldn't stop thinking about Brittany. I wondered about her marital situation and what she looked like under the cover-up. According to Jimmy, she looked pretty good. We continued working on Brittany's neighbor's project. I saw her once driving a black Outback and waved to her. Other than that, no sign of Brittany all week. On Friday afternoons, I often let the guys leave a couple of hours early but still paid them. This Friday, I was in the backyard surveying our progress and making mental notes for the next week when I heard a voice. "Hey, Tim." It was Brittany over the fence. "It's almost 5 o'clock. How about a beer?" she asked. I hesitated. My first impulse was to decline, but I thought for a moment. There was still that flicker of interest for her, and what happened in college was a long time ago. While I was considering, she called back to me. "Tim, it's just a beer. I promise I won't bite," she said with a laugh. "Sure," I agreed. She let me in through a side gate. She was dressed casually in shorts and a t-shirt. No bikini like Jimmy had seen, but still, she looked good. We sat at a patio table on her back deck. Brittany went inside through a set of French doors to get the beers. I looked around at the house and yard. It was nice. I knew she was house-sitting. Whoever owned it must be doing well, I thought. "Tim, I've got to say you look really good," she told me. No false modesty, I think I actually did look pretty good. I was lean and muscled from work, and I also belonged to a gym and kept in shape there too. I knew I was tanned and my sandy hair had lightened in the sun. I felt good too. "Thanks, Brittany," I said as I looked at her. "You've always looked good and I think you've improved with age," I added. She smiled at this. "I still need to lose some weight," she said, looking down at her body. My eyes followed and I think she caught me staring. "Some things never change," she laughed. "What?" I asked, confused. "You always liked looking at my chest," she laughed. "And I just caught you again." She smiled and looked me in the eyes. I was embarrassed. "Sorry," I told her. "It's okay," she said, still smiling. "It's flattering that I can still attract a man's attention with these. Sorry, I'm just messing with you." Things settled down after that. We had a normal conversation and caught up on our history since college. I told her about our family business, DOS, and my role. She told me she was an independent web designer and asked who did our website. It was a pleasant conversation, a mix of personal and some business. I told her our website wasn't updated and we needed help. She seemed to note this mentally. Finally, she talked a little about Donovan and her marriage. "Donovan and I got married in our last year of college," she told me. "We dated off and on through school. When I met you, we were off. I really liked you in college, and Donovan saw that and really worked to get back with me. I never really explained that to you or apologized. I felt bad." "That was a long time ago," I said, never admitting how it had hurt at the time. "We moved to Redmond, near his family. He's a mortgage broker and is successful. There was some infidelity, and we decided to divorce. Nothing terribly bitter. I guess we probably married too young. Not all the wild oats had been sown," she explained, glancing off into the distance. "We're still friendly, if not quite friends," she said. The beers were empty, and the conversation, pleasant as it was winding down. I stood and thanked Brittany for the beer. There was a moment of slight awkwardness. I felt close to Brittany, unusually close after not seeing her for years. "Maybe I'll see you next week," I said. "Sure," she replied. When she asked, I was a bit confused. "I guess I just meant I'll be next door working through next week," I explained. "Oh," she said, understanding. For a moment, she seemed slightly confused and maybe a bit disappointed. She gave me a warm, brief, tight hug, and then I left. Driving home, my thoughts were swirling. This was the girl who kind of dumped me in college. There were many nights I cursed her, yet she still turned me on. I liked her. I remembered feeling this way in college. I wasn't the most outgoing person, but it was easy to talk to Brittany, and our conversations were comfortable. I was going to have to think about all this. The following week, my crew and I continued to work at the house next to Brittany's. Part of me hoped to run into her, but another part of me said to slow down. Thursday night, after we had packed up for the day, I found a note on my windshield. "How about a drink and dinner tomorrow night? My place, 5:30. I thought about the invitation all evening. I wasn't sure I wanted to get involved with Brittany. On the other hand, I knew I really liked being with her, and I liked the way she looked. I kept going back and forth. By Friday noon, I still hadn't replied to Brittany. It was a hot day. I was dirty and sweaty from work. Emmy and Albert were on their lunch break and I was studying the plants. Knock, knock. It was Brittany coming through the gate. "I wanted to make sure you got my note," she said. "I hadn't heard back from you," she added with a half smile. I looked at Brittany. She was in white shorts and the tightest shirt I had ever seen, almost transparent. Everything was on display. I stuttered. "Sure," I said, trying not to sound stupid. 530, she said with mock exasperation. "See you then," she stated, turning and walking back through the gate. Well, that settled that. I wondered if she wore the tight shirt on purpose. Probably, I thought. Oh, well, it's just a drink and dinner. It had been a hot day and I was dirty. I kept a pair of clean gym shorts, a spare t-shirt, and some flip-flops in the truck. At 5:30, I rang Brittany's doorbell, carrying my clean clothes out back. She called from the backyard. She was sitting at the table, still dressed in the tight outfit she wore earlier. "Sorry, I'm a little dirty," I said. "I've got a casual change of clothes. I didn't have time to drive home and back." "You look fine," she told me with a smile. "If you want, you can take a quick shower," she offered. Actually, a shower would be great, I told her, and she showed me the guest bathroom. It felt strange to be nude in Brittany's house after all these years. It was kind of exciting, too. As I was washing up in the steamy shower, I felt a slight change in the air and a whisk of cooler air. Just then, the heavy glass shower door rolled open. More cool air, and in stepped Brittany, nude. "Hi," she said. "I hope this is okay. I thought about you naked in here and, well, I wanted to see," she told me with a smile, looking me up and down. She wanted to see. I finally got to enjoy her live and in color. "Finally," she said. "Finally what?" I asked. "Finally, I get you," she said. "After being close to you in college and never really doing anything with you, finally, we did something," she told me with a smile. I kind of felt the same way, but there was something else bothering me. The thoughts and talk of our early relationship brought back my anger and distrust from that time. Normally, after a new sexual encounter with someone I seemed to get along with, I would be happy. Sitting in Brittany's shower, both of us naked, I was happy, but there was that small thread of unease. Later, we had drinks and dinner Brittany had prepared on her patio in the warm evening. We continued our comfortable, pleasant conversation, but now with a greater depth of intimacy. After dinner, Brittany suddenly stopped talking and just looked at me. "What?" I asked. She continued to look at me. "Tim, we better go inside," she said. I gathered her up and placed her on the chaise lounge next to the table. I took a quick survey of the neighbors and saw only one house that could see into the backyard, and the shades were closed. We had sex. I loved every moment of it. As we lay in contented bliss, I began to wonder what this now meant. If it was just a one-time thing, I guessed I was okay with that. If it became more, and I kind of hoped it would, we would have to talk. Our college interactions cast a slight shadow over the potential relationship. I was tempted to stay the night, but I decided to go home. It had been a good evening, fantastic sex, a good meal, and I enjoyed Brittany's company. Beyond the physical interaction. Over the weekend, while I worked on my parents' house, I thought about Friday night and Brittany. I knew the correct protocol would be a phone call, an invitation for coffee or a drink, or at least a text message. I did none of this and wasn't sure why. Maybe I was just protecting myself. In any event, life went on. Albert, Jimmy, and I continued the project next door to Brittany's Monday and Tuesday. I did not see her. Wednesday, I found a note in a cute little sealed envelope on my car. "Call me if you want." That was the message. I didn't call her Wednesday, but as I was heading to my truck Thursday, I saw her in her black Outback pulling out of the garage. I stepped to the side of the road to talk to her. "Hi," I said. "I got your note, thanks." She had her window down, big dark glasses covering her face. No friendly smile. Her face was expressionless and she hadn't said a word. Just stared at me blankly. I sensed the chill and it wasn't coming from the car's air conditioning. "We've been pretty busy," I stammered. "I was going to call you." "Tim," she said, interrupting my mumbling. "Enough. I get it. I was just a fling. A bump and run. An easy job. I just thought we had something more than that. Anyway, I've got to get going." She turned to face the road, intent on her destination. "Brittany, wait," I said as she started to take off. "I want to see you again. I want to explain myself." "Can we have dinner this weekend?" I asked. She sat for a minute, looking at me with the same blank expression. "Call me," was all she said, and then she was gone. I did call her, and she agreed to have dinner with me on Saturday night. We went downtown to a cute Italian restaurant, Pedro's. Wooden marionettes decorated the walls. It was a warm, intimate environment. Throughout dinner, we found the same easy conversation we always had. Brittany was a bit reserved at first, but we got past that. At the end of the evening, I invited her to my house for a nightcap. I thought about the great time we had last week, but after the nightcap, she said she had to go. We hugged goodbye, and I kissed her. She kissed me back enthusiastically. As she left, she told me, "This time you better call me." I smiled and waved, knowing I would call her. And so our rekindled relationship began. We talked regularly and saw each other a few times a week. The sex started again after I called her and asked her out. It was good, and we were quite compatible. Most weekends, we spent the nights together. After a few months, I thought it was time for Brittany to meet my mom and dad. As I mentioned, I worked with my parents at our family business, designed outdoor spaces. My dad started the business over 25 years ago, but it really took off in the last 10 years thanks to my mom. My dad is kind and easygoing, always seeing the good in people. My mom, on the other hand, is smart, ambitious, and calculating. She wears the pants in their relationship. Though my mom sees the value I bring to the business, she still treats me like an employee. Even with Taylor living on the East Coast, she often manages to slip in compliments about him, often with some vague comparison to me and my shortcomings. I was a bit nervous about having Brittany meet my parents. My mom wanted a family dinner at their house, but I insisted on a restaurant downtown. I made reservations at the Whiskey Cat, a steak restaurant in the heart of town. I wanted the first meeting on neutral ground. Any nervousness I had quickly evaporated. My dad was as charming as ever, but my mom surprised me. She was gracious and personable, asking Brittany about herself and seeming genuinely interested. I was pleased and thankful for my mom's positive behavior. It seemed like Brittany and my mom really hit it off. Much later, I thought about the fact that my mom didn't treat me, her own son, as well as she did my girlfriend. As we continued dating and our relationship grew more intimate, I knew we needed to talk about Donovan. The few times I brought up the subject, Brittany quickly dismissed it. I let it go, knowing the pain of a failed relationship, especially with infidelity. We had returned from dinner one night, and my house was close enough to walk. We were in a relaxed, pleasant mood, hand in hand, on the way home. "Brittany," I said softly as we climbed the steps to my door. "I think it's time we talk a little about our relationship," I told her. "Okay," she said, "but what's there to talk about? I love you, you love me, I think, and we have a good life." "Oh," she added with a smile, "and our sex life isn't too bad." I hugged her, rubbed her hips, and told her I knew all that. But in a more serious tone, I asked her about her marriage. She immediately became quiet, and the happy mood was gone. "If we are going to take the next step in this relationship, I need to know more about your past, including your marriage," I told her. She paused for a minute and thought. "Okay," she sighed and agreed. Then she told me the story. She and Donovan were off and on in college, mostly on, but when I first met her, they were off. During college, she admitted to sleeping with 2 other guys besides Donovan. I would have been number 3. She told me if things had gone differently that night at the Commons, their senior year, they stayed together. No breakups. Donovan had been hurt in the first football game of the year and medically retired. He was around more, and that year their relationship grew. Right before graduation, he proposed to her, and they moved to his hometown, Redmond, not far from where I grew up. Donovan went into the mortgage business, and Brittany began designing websites independently. The timing for Donovan was perfect with the falling interest rates. He was making a lot of money and investing in the rising local real estate market. Eventually, they drifted apart and divorced. I asked about the circumstances of the breakup. She reiterated that they had married young and drifted apart. She told me there was no longer bitterness between them. In fact, she still managed his website. When I asked about the infidelity, Brittany said she didn't want to talk about it. Too painful, I guessed. Brittany told me they were still friends. I thought about that, feeling slightly uncomfortable. Her ex-husband, who used to be intimate with her, was still in her life. I had to think more about that. I did feel like this was a good step in our relationship. Sharing this information, I now knew more about the woman I had fallen in love with. Our relationship progressed without many problems. Brittany was planning to move in with me after the people she was house-sitting for returned from their charity mission in West Africa. This was another big step in our relationship. Brittany also began to manage our family business's website. She worked with my mom on this, and they became friendly, if not outright friends. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Even though I was a valuable part of the family business, my mom treated me like a hired laborer. Brittany began mentioning the advantages of refinancing my house near downtown. Interest rates had dropped, and I could lower my payments. She said Donovan could help me with the refinance. I thought about that, and I knew she was right. I just wasn't sure I wanted to involve Donovan in our lives. The neighbor directly behind me was a hoarder. There was stuff all over her property. Stacks of junk partially covered with blue tarps and a rusting old vehicle. A shed had partially collapsed. It was a mess. I got to know the owner when my back fence, which divided our properties, fell down in a windstorm. I told her I'd fix it, and I did. Every few months, she'd ask me to help with some home repair. I felt sorry for her and usually helped. One night, I was home alone and the doorbell rang. It was Hilda. This was unusual. Normally, she would just holler over the fence. After a few pleasantries, she got to the point. "Tim," she said, "I'm dying. The doctors give me a month, maybe 2. That's it." "Oh, Hilda," I said, "that's terrible," and moved to embrace her. She waved me away. "I'm actually surprised I've lived this long, but the reason I'm here is to see if you want to buy my property and take Muffin," she said. When I looked confused, she added, "Muffin is my cat. I need $150,000. I'm selling as is. It's yours if you want it," she said. "It's probably worth more than that, but I don't want any real estate people poking through my stuff. If you say no, I'll offer it to the guy next to you, but I'd rather sell to you," she told me. I thought for a moment and told her I'd take it. "It may take a few weeks to get the money," I said. "That's fine," she replied. "The money's for my daughter in Idaho. I haven't been much of a mother to her. Sending her the money is the least I can do." She told me. I knew the property was worth more, but it would be a lot of work cleaning it up. The house was a teardown. I liked cats, so Muffin wouldn't be a problem. Now I thought I'd probably have to meet with Donovan. Later that week, I did meet with Donovan. He had a nice office on the main floor of a newer brick building in Redmond. I noticed a Fitness Plus workout gym next to his office. I was a member of Fitness Plus locally, but didn't realize there was one in Redmond. Above his office were 4 stories of new, upscale apartments or condos. We met in his office. Though I'd never really been introduced to him formally, he greeted me with familiarity. Donovan was a nice-looking guy, big from his football days, but still lean. He was friendly and pleasant to talk with. I couldn't tell if he was genuinely nice or just slick enough to seem that way. I signed about 1,000 sheets of paper. I refinanced at a lower rate and had enough equity to get the extra $150,000 for Hilda. My payment went up a total of $81 a month. Afterwards, Donovan told me a little about his business. He had developed the building with his office, the gym, and the apartments above. He partnered with a couple of pro football players he knew from college on the project. He was renting out the rest of the apartments on the upper floors. I walked away liking Donovan despite myself. He seemed like a good guy. In the back of my mind, I couldn't help but think that he used to date Brittany. I tried to keep those thoughts to a minimum. So far, I liked him, and he was going to help me get Hilda's property. Brittany moved in a few months later. Our relationship was going great. She and I had fun together. We seemed to have similar life goals, and our sex life was fantastic. She was now our web designer at DOS. She interacted with my mother, and they seemed to have a positive, friendly relationship. A part of me was envious of their relationship. My mom appeared to enjoy a closeness with Brittany that I never had. Meanwhile, our family business was booming. We had the 3 crews busy with jobs lined up for months. We had begun talking about hiring a full-time salesperson. This would allow my dad and me more time to finish our projects. It seemed like more and more of these sales calls became my responsibility. My dad was slowing down a bit. He was still productive and did great work, but 25 years of manual labor was taking its toll on him. Besides our business and my relationship with Brittany, I was busy. Hilda finally passed away, and I had the unenviable job of cleaning up her house and property. I was also recruited at least weekly to help at my parents' house with work for my mom. One night, Brittany and I were lying in bed. "Timothy," she said, using my full name, "when are we going to get married?" I sat silent for a couple of moments. My silence must have alarmed her. "Tim," she asked again. "Wait a minute," I laughingly protested. "I was just about to have some fun," I said. "Well, no one's having any fun until you answer my question," she firmly stated. I thought for a moment. I loved Brittany. I couldn't imagine being without her. My mental images of my life moving forward always included Brittany. We were still young, but deep down I knew that I did want to get married to her. She may be just accelerating the timetable a bit. "Brittany," I told her, "I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." With that, she screamed, threw back the sheets, and buried my face into her. A little later, I had her screaming in a different way. It was a good night. I had a bit of a surprise the next day when I received a call from my mom. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "I was on a job site in Sun Ridge." "Tell you what?" I asked. Had there been something on my project she needed information about? "Brittany told me you two were engaged," she said. "Brittany is a wonderful young woman. She and I have already started talking about wedding plans. We've got a lot to do in a short period of time. Have you picked out the ring?" She kept talking, and I didn't need to add much to the conversation. Later, after I got off the phone with my mom, I thought about what had happened. Sure, I told Brittany I wanted to spend my life with her, but was that a proposal? She certainly took it that way. Thinking it over, I knew we were going to get married eventually. It was just happening a lot quicker than I expected, and now my mom was involved. As wedding plans swirled around me, my mom brought up a subject. "I assume Taylor will be the best man?" she stated rather than asked. I hadn't thought of Taylor in quite some time. We weren't close. He was living on the East Coast, working in finance. I rarely talked about him and almost never talked to him. "I'm sure Taylor will be happy to serve in that capacity," my mom said, as if I'd already agreed. "Yeah, Mom, I'll think about that," I replied. "There's nothing to think about. He's your only brother," she stated firmly. Then she moved on to planning more details of my wedding. My mom and Brittany planned everything. I half expected my mom to come in with photos of the stripper for my bachelor party. The Monday before the wedding, Taylor arrived. That evening, we had a small reception at my parents' house. A few family members and close friends were there. When I introduced Taylor to Brittany, he was on his best behavior. He gave a light hug and a beaming smile. Taylor was polite, asking Brittany how we met, about her career, and so on. Later, he walked up to me with a broad smile. "You did good, little bro," he told me. "Brittany is a nice girl. Good thing I didn't see her first," he said with a laugh and punched me on the shoulder. I gave him a look, wondering where that comment had come from. It seemed inappropriate. "Just kidding, bro," he laughed as he mingled away. Later, as Brittany and I were heading home, she commented about Taylor. "I thought your brother was nice. A perfect gentleman," she said. I thought about that. I had told Brittany about Taylor and my relationship growing up, how he always wanted the spotlight and how my mom always favored him. I also thought about that comment, a perfect gentleman. It seemed odd. One thing Brittany had talked about long before the wedding was who would be invited. I was pretty easygoing about these things and left most of it to my mom and Brittany. But there was one name we debated more than argued about. Donovan. Brittany insisted on inviting her ex-husband. This made me uncomfortable. Yes, I had met Donovan and he helped me with my refinance. And yes, Donovan was a nice guy and had invited me out twice for a beer. I declined both times, but it was hard not to think about how he used to be with my soon-to-be wife. Despite my discomfort, Brittany got her way. Donovan would attend. She even got my mother to agree with her on this. The wedding itself was fun. The ceremony and reception were on my family's land, in an open field between the office and my parents' house. Tables and chairs were set up with big white tents in case of bad weather. Throughout the evening, Brittany and I mingled, sometimes together, sometimes apart. Both of us were being congratulated and asked to join different groups for photos and other duties. At one point, I realized I hadn't seen Brittany for a while. I started looking for her. Taylor walked up at that moment. "You looking for the beautiful bride?" he asked with a bit of a smile. "Yeah, as a matter of fact, I am," I told Taylor. He threw an arm around my shoulder and turned me. I was now looking down the hill. With his chin, He gestured toward a picnic table near a pine tree, somewhat separated from the wedding festivities. There sat Brittany in her flowing white wedding gown, deep in conversation with Donovan. I started to move toward them, but Taylor held me tight, not letting me move. "Easy, bro," he said quietly. "Don't cause a scene on your wedding day. I'll keep my eye on them. It's all innocent," he said. I thanked him, took one last look, and was pulled away by a group of friends. I felt a unique emotion of gratitude toward Taylor. It wasn't often that he did any type of favor for me that wasn't also for his benefit. It made me think better of him, at least for the moment. Shortly after, Brittany appeared, and the wedding festivities continued. My observations of her and Donovan in a close conversation were almost forgotten. We honeymooned on the Big Island in Kona. We stayed at the Kona Plantation Spa and Resort, a sprawling stucco building with swimming pools, palm trees, ocean views, and several great restaurants. Brittany looked great in her bikinis. She had tried to lose some weight before the trip, and though she still could lose a little more, she looked really good. One afternoon, we met a couple from Canada by the pool. Their names were Rick and Gina. They were celebrating their 5-year anniversary. It was one of those casual vacation friendships where you tell each other where you're from and talk about local restaurants or beaches. We had an amazing time and a lot of fun together. All too soon, we were back at work. Apparently, Taylor had stayed a few days after the wedding and spent time with my parents. We were solidly in the busy season at work, and it felt like I had to work twice as hard to make up for the days I had been gone. We were definitely growing the family business. There were a few reasons for this. The main one was the influx of people moving to Central Oregon for the climate and lifestyle. Another reason was my full-time work with the crew, which boosted our reputation. My team built high-quality projects, but the biggest factor was my mom. She was the driving force. She kept us organized, negotiated the best deals, handled our advertising, and marketed the company. I loved the work, except for one part. I hated sales calls. Sometimes you'd get a great client like Carlton Eldridge, a real estate lawyer from California. We finished his project just before the wedding. I spent a few evenings after work chatting with Carlton. He was friendly and appreciated our work. He even offered legal help for free if I ever needed it. But he was an exception. Most clients were whiny and picky, and I didn't have the patience for that. My mom insisted we treat our clients well. We had a great year, and in January, we handed out profit-sharing checks. Mine was nearly $40,000. Brittany was thrilled. "Let's get a new car," she said, "or go on a trip. We had so much fun in Hawaii. Let's go somewhere else." When I told her I wanted to invest the money, she got grumpy. I explained that I couldn't do physical labor forever. My body would eventually give out like my dad's had in recent years. We needed to plan for the future. She protested, "You're no fun," clearly upset. As the new year started, business remained strong. Brittany's web design business was also doing well. She was good at it, and our improved website helped our business. One thing that bothered me was that Donovan was still her client. I'd occasionally ask if she met or spoke with him. Brittany would give me brief answers. I think she knew I was jealous and downplayed their interactions, but I still knew they were in contact. She hadn't given me any reason to think there was anything going on with Donovan, but it still annoyed me. Overall, our life was good. We had the occasional argument, usually about money, but we got along well. Brittany was fixing up our house near downtown, making it our home. When I wasn't working, I was helping my dad finish his and my mom's place on the family land, or working on the disaster that used to be Hilda's property. Then in October, I got a strange text from my mom. "Company meeting 9 a.m. Saturday." That was all it said. I wondered what the big mystery was. My mom and Brittany were close, so I asked if she'd heard anything. She said no, but her tone made me think she knew something. Saturday morning, I arrived at my parents' house. "Come in," my dad said formally. "Would you like coffee?" I asked. "What's going on? You're acting weird." He looked towards the kitchen. Just then, my mom and brother Taylor walked into the living room, grinning. Taylor gave me a big hug. "Bro," he said. Everyone was acting strange. I was confused. My mom had called a company meeting. My dad was acting uncomfortable, and now Taylor was here. What was up? I soon found out. "Timothy," my mom began, "our family business is growing, and now more than ever, it's a family business. We are happy to have Taylor back with us. Starting in a few weeks, he'll be in charge of sales and marketing for designed outdoor spaces. What? My brother, who always thought he was too good for this business, was now back. I was shocked. I got along better with Taylor when he was far away. Now he'd be living in town and we'd be working together. My mom went on about how professional Taylor was and how good this was for the business. She even said I wouldn't have to handle sales calls anymore. Though I didn't say it, I was pretty sure this wouldn't work out well. When I glanced at my dad, he gave me a forced smile and avoided my eyes. This was clearly a power move by my mom and Taylor. I'd have to think about this. The dynamics of our small company had just shifted. When I got home, Brittany could tell I was upset. "So they told you?" she asked. "You knew?" I said. "Last week, your mom said she had been talking to Taylor," Brittany said, "but she swore me to secrecy." So everyone knew but me. Great. I was more pissed off now, but didn't know what to do. After some thought, I decided to ignore the situation and go on with my life as usual. That worked for a while. In early November, my mom called another company meeting. Since Taylor joined the business, I had minimized contact with my mom and dad. My dad seemed sorry about how things played out and was overly nice to me. My mom, on the other hand, had become even more controlling. Taylor and my mom were allies. My dad was neutral, and I felt like the opposition. With Taylor back, my mom's influence had definitely increased. I began to feel like a hired hand. This family meeting was more formal. We sat at the family dining table with my mom at the head. She was running the show. "Timothy, I want you to free up time to work with Taylor," she said. "Though Taylor is sharp and has some experience with our business, I want you to get him familiar with the type and scope of our current projects." When I asked about the projects I was currently working on, she said that I was to make sure my crew completed them on schedule. It soon became clear that it was my job to make sure Taylor did his job correctly. After the family meeting was over, I tried to get out quickly. "Hey, bro," Taylor said. "Tell Brittany thanks for the lead on the apartment. I'm all moved in." "Apartment?" I asked, confused. "Yeah. Didn't she tell you? Her ex is developing some residential spaces in Redmond. I moved in last week. They're pretty nice. I'll have you guys over sometime," he added. I didn't reply. I just took off. I heard my dad calling my name as I left, but I ignored him. I was pissed. Pissed off about a lot of things. First, my mom made it sound like I was going to be babysitting Taylor's work for months. And then Brittany helped Taylor rent a condo from Donovan. There was too much going on behind the scenes, and I was the last to know. When I got home, I took my anger out on Brittany. I yelled at her for not telling me about helping Taylor get a place to live. She knew the dynamics between my brother and me. She apologized, saying she didn't want to upset me because I had been under so much stress. Eventually, she cried, and I apologized, and we tried to get back to normal, but things remained a little off. Over the next few weeks, I began working with Taylor. One thing Taylor had going for him was his charming, easygoing personality. Many customers liked that. It came naturally to him. He had spent his whole life using that natural ability. But as we worked together, I noticed he liked to take shortcuts. He was always looking for the easy way to do something. He'd skip a step or overlook something. I tried to explain to him how important small details were. He would nod and agree, but I could tell he was ignoring my comments. This attitude bothered me. A construction site can be dangerous if all precautions are not taken. I tried to talk to my dad about it one time. He agreed it could be a problem, but did nothing to correct Taylor. Eventually, I moved back into full-time project management, and Taylor was full-time sales. I was at a job site later that spring when a brand new red Ford F-150 pulled up. Out hopped Taylor. "What do you think of my new wheels, bro?" he asked, a big smile on his face. I just stared, not saying a word. "Mom and I were talking and wanted to make sure I made the right impression on sales calls," he said. "We decided a new truck was necessary." I looked over at my older truck, beat up and dented. I just shook my head. He went on to tell me he'd had a complaint from the homeowner on the current project I was working on. Taylor and I walked the job site, and he pointed out the customer's concern. I explained to Taylor why we had to build this detail the way we had. We needed to comply with the local building code, and that was why it was done this way. "Try to fix it up a little," he called over his shoulder as he walked back to the truck. "The customer's not happy," he added. There were many things that bothered me about this interaction. Obviously the truck, but perhaps more so his passing the customer complaint to me. That was his job. And finally, his tone when he left reminded me of how he treated me growing up. He was acting like he was my boss. That really bugged me. The months went on, and the joy I once felt about my job and the family business was dampened by Taylor's presence. My mom was quite pleased. Business was strong, and she attributed that to Taylor. When we had a customer complaint, the salesperson was supposed to work with the customer to figure it out. Taylor would dump it on me, and it became my job to solve whatever problem came along. My mood affected my relationship with Brittany, too. She was naturally happy and upbeat. My negativity dragged her down, and we didn't seem to enjoy each other as much as we used to. I tried to dig a little deeper into the problem. The issues were deep set. When I talked to Brittany about my challenges with my brother, she listened, but I wasn't sure she got it. "Tim," she said, "I'm sure things will get better with Taylor. He's still new to the job. He'll learn." "But Brittany," I said, "I'm not sure you get it. He can be a real self-absorbed jerk." "Timothy," she replied, "he's your brother. I think he's a nice guy. Give him a chance." I just didn't think she got it. On the surface, it was the way Taylor felt he had the right to boss me around, giving me the more difficult parts of the business to fix. And my mom, too, who was in charge, supported this, but it went much deeper. My mom had always favored Taylor. He was the good son, and now I was relegated to second-class status in the business, too. Other than maybe Roman, I knew I did the best work on our jobs. Yet my lazy brother got the preferential treatment. I tried to focus more positive attention on Brittany, and it seemed to help a little. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was drifting away from me. I was leaving a project near Redmond to get some concrete when I saw Brittany's shiny black car drive past me. She looked like she was on the phone. I wondered what she was doing in Redmond. Donovan's office was near where I saw her. That night at dinner, I asked her about her day. She said it was just normal stuff. When I asked if she'd gone anywhere, she mentioned running a few errands. I told her I saw her in Redmond after lunch. She paused and said she was at the Fitness Plus in Redmond. I asked why she went there since our regular gym was closer. She said the Redmond gym was newer with better equipment. I thought about how the Fitness Plus in Redmond was near Donovan's office. Should I say anything? Her excuse was believable, but why didn't she mention it earlier? I decided to let it go but stay alert, especially about Donovan. The next day at work, I thought about how happy we were on our honeymoon in Hawaii. I decided to plan a surprise second honeymoon there. That night, I found a nice condo near Mount Alani on the Big Island. It was expensive, but worth it. I started working on flights. Before going further, I called my mom to clear my work schedule for the vacation. I explained that it was a surprise for Brittany, so she shouldn't say anything. My mom agreed to schedule around my vacation. Later that afternoon, my mom called. She said she had added my vacation to the schedule and offered to help with lodging and flights. Though I had planned to do it myself, I knew my mom was super organized. I told her about the place in Mount Alani, and she said she'd check into it. That night, Brittany and I had dinner at a small pub. I had been trying to be more positive, and it seemed like our relationship was improving. I told Brittany I had a surprise for her. She loved surprises and asked eagerly what it was. I told her about the trip to Hawaii, almost like a second honeymoon. She was excited and clapped her hands when I said we'd leave in about 5 weeks. "I need to go on a diet starting now," she said. Brittany was always on some diet, but this time it sounded serious. We were in a good mood as we walked home that night. The next day, my mom called excitedly. She said she found the perfect place for the trip, with a beautiful view, great beach access, and a private pool. She mentioned that our room would walk out to the pool area. I was confused and asked what she meant by our room. Mom said, "This is a bit of a surprise, but it's going to be a family vacation." She explained the house had 3 bedrooms, one for her and Dad, one for Taylor and his girlfriend Mia, and one for us. I told her I wanted a trip just for Brittany and me, not a family vacation. She chuckled and assured me we'd have plenty of privacy. When I got home, Brittany was still excited about the trip. She talked about her new diet, workout schedule, and needing a new bikini. I told her I wanted a trip just for us, not with my family. She said not to worry, and we'd have lots of alone time. Her reassurance lifted my mood for the moment, but my mom's actions changed how I felt about the vacation. I began to think about a future outside the family business. I hoped the trip to Hawaii would strengthen my relationship with Brittany, but so far it hadn't. We were all working hard to prepare for the time off, everyone except Taylor. He was as relaxed and easygoing as ever. Long lunches and short days were Taylor's routine. Once I saw Brittany's car heading toward Redmond. I assumed she was going to Fitness Plus, but she said she was working out after work. Brittany was focused on getting into bikini shape, and I noticed her body slowly transforming. She looked good, but I wasn't getting to enjoy this new body very often. She was always too busy preparing for Hawaii. It felt like this vacation was more about Brittany than about us. "Tim," Brittany grabbed my arm, "we're boarding, come on." She pulled me up, walking down the jetway to board. That feeling of uneasiness remained. I couldn't pinpoint it, but I knew something wasn't right. The flight was uneventful, and after getting our luggage and rental car, we finally arrived at our vacation home for the week. It was spectacular. Tropical landscaping, a gourmet kitchen, a view of the ocean, and an aquamarine infinity pool. I kept thinking, if only it was just Brittany and me. Even under these circumstances, it was hard to stay upset in such a beautiful place. Just as my mom said, our room was the nicest. The French doors opened right to the pool, and we were in the far wing, away from the others in the living areas. Tired from the travel, we all slumped in the lounge chairs around the pool. My mom made Mai Tais, and we all enjoyed the tropical atmosphere and the ocean views. After a few gulps of the drink, Brittany stood up. "I think I'll get my bathing suit on and cool off," she declared. That sounded like a good idea, but for the moment, I was content sitting and soaking in the atmosphere. A few minutes later, Brittany strolled out. My eyes nearly popped out of my head. She was wearing the skimpiest bathing suit I had ever seen. It was red with minimal material, barely covering her front and almost nothing covering her hips. Her top mostly just covered her. Barely. She was nearly in threads. Everyone just stared without saying anything. She looked at us, aware of how she looked. "I know it's pretty skimpy," she said. "And I know I can't wear this at the beach, but we're all family, so I thought it would be okay here," she said, looking for approval. For a moment, no one replied. "You look awesome," Taylor piped up. Brittany smiled at that. I watched Taylor ogle my wife, his sister-in-law. His look, tinged with lust, bothered me. This was supposed to be our second honeymoon, not a family vacation. One thing was hard to miss: Brittany's body. She had finally lost those last 10 or 15 pounds and looked great, something Taylor had noticed too. The next day, my mom thought a trip to Costco in Kona was a good idea. We could stock up on food and drinks for the week. She corralled my dad into going and asked Taylor and me to go with them. I wasn't excited to drive 45 minutes each way to Costco, but if my dad and Taylor were going, I guessed I should go too. My dad said he'd warm up the car and meet us outside the garage. When I got there, it was just my dad and me. We took off. "Where's Taylor?" I asked. "He said he wasn't feeling well," my dad replied. I thought about that. If there was ever a person to evade responsibility, it was Taylor. No other way to put it. He was just plain lazy. I wondered when his behavior would be noticed by someone in the family business besides me. It was nearly noon by the time we returned. "Oh, good," my mom said. "I just came up to get lunch together." "Where's Brittany?" I asked. "They're down at the beach," she said. "Oh," I said, "is poor Taylor feeling better?" My mom looked at me, trying to judge my sincerity. She paused. "I think he was jet-lagged," she replied. "Here, take this lunch down to the beach for everyone," she said, handing me the cooler. I found Taylor and Brittany lying side by side on towels, fairly close. Brittany was wearing a slightly less revealing bikini, but it was still quite small. I set the cooler down and moved to slide between my brother and my wife. "Move over, Taylor," I told him. "How are you feeling?" I asked with some concern. "Doing better, thanks," Taylor replied, not sure if I meant it. We spent the afternoon at the beach, hanging out and swimming. Brittany and I went on a walk and chatted. I was desperately trying to find that good vibe between us, but something still felt off. She was in a good mood, but I knew Brittany well enough to know it wasn't a great mood. And in Hawaii, there was no excuse not to be in a great mood. The days in Hawaii slowly unfolded. In the mornings, we would go sightseeing or explore a new beach. The afternoons were spent hanging out on the beach or around the pool. We went out to a few restaurants, but mostly stayed in at night and used the gourmet kitchen. The following afternoon, after a morning hike through the humid jungle, Taylor, Brittany, and I were relaxing around the pool, drinking cold beers. Brittany announced she was going to take a shower. She left her backpack, phone, and towel at her side table and went inside. "Tim, can you grab me a beer?" Taylor asked. I should have told him to get one himself, but family habits had conditioned me to obey. I went inside to get the beers. What I didn't see was Taylor messing around with Brittany's iPhone on the side table. When I returned, Taylor had moved his stuff onto my chair, so I sat in Brittany's now empty chair. We sat quietly for a few minutes until Brittany's phone started to vibrate. Out of habit, I picked it up and looked at the screen. "Scum," I whispered to myself when I saw who was calling. "Who is it?" Taylor asked innocently. I just shook my head, but he kept looking at me, waiting for an answer. "Stupid Donovan," I finally told him. Taylor shook his head and looked disappointed. He turned and studied me. "What?" I asked. "I don't know why you allow that," Taylor said. I didn't reply. "Tim," Taylor continued, "you've got a beautiful wife and she's friends with that jerk. They used to be married, so he knows all her secrets." He paused. "I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but their friendship is too close." I thought about what he said. He was right. I had thought the same thing many times. But whenever I brought it up with Brittany, it led to a big fight. She'd say she's allowed to have friends and that I should trust her. She also said she needed to talk to Donovan for business. I knew I needed to discuss Donovan with Brittany, but I didn't want to ruin the last days of our vacation. For now, I tried to forget about Donovan, but the thought kept bothering me. The next day was our last full day at Mount Alani, and we wanted to spend as much time on the beach as possible. My mom packed a cooler with food and drinks, and we got ready to head to the beach. Just as we were leaving, my phone rang. It was Albert, speaking too fast with his accent. I asked him to slow down. He explained that our picky clients, the Mackenzies, had complained about something Jimmy was doing, and Albert got involved. I knew this would take time to sort out, so I told everyone else to go to the beach without me. Albert told me everything he knew, and then I called the Mackenzies. I explained that the issue was because of the local building code, and their deck had to be built that way. Mrs. Mackenzie, who was difficult, said their deck in California wasn't built like that. I tried to explain that building codes vary, but they didn't get it. Finally, I said we would refund their money and dismantle the deck by tomorrow. Suddenly, they changed their tune and said everything was fine, they just had a few suggestions. I told them we would finish the project, but from now on, we would handle the building, and they could enjoy it when it was done. They agreed, and I finally joined everyone at the beach 45 minutes later. As I walked, I thought about a few things. First, dealing with the client was Taylor's job, but my lazy brother had dumped it on me. Second, I couldn't stop thinking about Donovan and Brittany. Even in Hawaii, something felt off between us. Her unexplained trips to Redmond and Donovan's phone call yesterday added to my suspicions. As I walked across the warm sand, I saw my dad asleep on his towel and my mom reading a book. Brittany and Taylor were waist-deep in the water, talking. I walked toward them. One thing about calm water is that sound carries well. As I got closer, I heard snippets of their conversation. Donovan, divorce, and Taylor. I stood at the water's edge, trying to understand what I'd heard. Brittany saw me and waved, then walked toward me. As she got closer, I saw what looked like guilt on her face. She was overly friendly and affectionate as we laid out our towels. I quietly asked her what she and Taylor were talking about. She wouldn't look me in the eyes and quickly replied, "Oh, nothing. We were just saying how nice this trip has been and how we wish we didn't have to go home tomorrow." I knew what I heard had nothing to do with the trip or going home. Brittany was lying. This, along with the distance I'd felt before the trip, made me wonder what was really going on. This trip was supposed to bring us closer. The rest of the day and evening were uneventful, except for one conversation with Taylor. I asked him what he and Brittany were talking about in the ocean. He paused and looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Nothing much, bro. She's a great woman. I try to keep her away from Donovan." "Why? What did she say?" I asked. At that moment, our mom called for Taylor, and he walked away. I didn't get a chance to follow up with him. I was in a bit of a funk at the airport the next day. This trip had not helped Brittany and me get closer. I knew something was going on with her, and I was pretty sure it involved Donovan. Once we got home, I decided to try harder to get us back on track. First, I needed to find out what she was up to, especially if it involved Donovan. No, I didn't hire a private detective or borrow a friend's car to follow her. I just watched her closely. I called her more often to see what she was doing. I popped in at different times since she worked from home. My home. I don't think this behavior seemed suspicious. Still, there were large, unexplained gaps in her days. I questioned her about things, but stopped short of accusing her. I learned nothing new. She could get irritated if I probed too much. One day, leaving a job site, I noticed one of my truck tires was low. On the way home, I dropped it off at the tire store. Albert followed me there and gave me a lift home. I asked Brittany if she could drop me by the tire shop in the morning. The next morning, we got in her Outback and headed for the tire shop. She plugged her phone into the USB port in her Subaru. One thing about Apple CarPlay is that it guesses your destination based on where you usually go. It flashes your most common destination on the screen and shows the ETA. When she plugged in her phone, it immediately flashed the address of Donovan's building in Redmond. Yes, there is a newer Fitness Plus at that location, along with the rest of Donovan's development and his office. She saw me notice the address. "I guess my Subaru thinks I need a workout," she half laughed, her voice a bit nervous. I considered my options at this point. I knew something was up and suspected it involved Donovan. The phone call in Hawaii, Taylor's comments, and her unexplained actions all pointed to him. It was all circumstantial, but I didn't believe in coincidences. The next few weeks went by with nothing suspicious or unexplained. Then one night, out of the blue, Brittany said she was going to Vancouver to visit her sister Claire, Claire's husband Mitchell, and their 3 children. My antenna went up. Brittany and Claire were never particularly close. Claire was 5 years older, a mother and housewife, married to Mitch, a fireman. Brittany wasn't close to her niece and nephews. Other than the wedding, I'd only been around them a few times. I questioned Brittany about the trip. Why was she going? What were they going to do? What brought this on suddenly? Her replies were vague, and I sensed some nervousness. Still, there was nothing concrete to confirm my suspicions. Her plan was to leave Thursday evening and be back on Sunday. It was about a 3.5-hour drive to Vancouver, Washington from Central Oregon. Brittany was particularly nice and attentive toward me in the days leading up to the trip. She seemed in a good mood, excited to see her sister. She called me midday on Friday, and everything seemed fine. She updated me on her sister and her family, and I thought I heard her sister in the background at one point. Everything appeared normal. Friday evening, I needed a specific ingredient for dinner. I called Brittany, but it went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message, knowing she'd see the call and call me back. By 9:30 that night, she hadn't replied. I tried again, voicemail again. At this point, I was more curious than concerned. The next day, I tried her mid-morning and again at lunchtime. Same result. By mid-afternoon, I decided to try her sister. Better yet, I tried Claire's husband. He answered immediately. "Tim?" He sounded slightly alarmed, understandably. I never called him. He assumed some sort of emergency. "What's going on?" he quickly asked. "Mitch, sorry to bother you, but I haven't been able to reach Brittany," I told him. "Well, she stopped by yesterday when I was home, but to my knowledge, she and Claire weren't scheduled to get together again," he added. "Do you mean," I asked, "she's not staying with you?" "Staying with us? No, I didn't know she was supposed to. She told us she was meeting some college friends in Portland," Mitch replied. I took in this information. Okay, I knew something was up. Now the thread was starting to unravel. "Tim, are you still there?" Mitch asked. "Yeah, I'm still here. Hey, Mitch, I must have been confused about her plans." "You're right. She did say she was staying with college friends. Sorry to bother you," I said, and hung up. I sat there and thought. She lied to me. She told me she was staying at Claire's. She told Claire she was with college friends. I was pretty sure I knew which old college friend she was staying with. She would have never suspected I'd contact Claire or Mitch. Just then, my phone rang. "Brittany." "Hi, honey," she greeted me. "I missed your calls. Is everything okay?" she asked. I knew I'd have to put on my best acting job. "Yeah, I was just looking for the teriyaki sauce. I finally found it," I said as neutrally as possible. "How are Claire and Mitch?" I asked. She went on to tell me everything was fine. She updated me on the niece and nephews and talked about normal stuff. "So, are you sleeping on their couch?" I asked, knowing their house was only a 3-bedroom. Yes, but it's not too bad, she replied. Okay. Any threat of a logical explanation was now gone. She was lying to me. I quickly got off the phone. I was sad and angry throughout the afternoon, knowing that she was spending the night with Donovan somewhere. A couple of times I picked up the phone ready to call her, but I stopped. I had to get my emotions in check. I needed proof and a plan. All afternoon and evening, I thought there was no way my marriage would survive this. I felt sad and emotional at times, but mostly, I was angry. On Sunday afternoon, she came home around 4 o'clock. I had to act calm and pretend everything was fine. I tried my best, but underneath, I was furious about her lies and possible cheating. We had a normal evening. I was so reserved that she asked if everything was okay. I told her yes, and used the excuse that I was busy at work. She gave me a long look, trying to see if I was telling the truth. Luckily, there were no romantic moves from either of us that night. She was probably tired, and I didn't want any part of it. The next night, Monday, Brittany didn't come home until after 7 p.m. When she arrived, she seemed out of breath and her hair was damp. "Where were you?" I asked. "At the gym," she said, watching my reaction. "Is your hair wet?" I asked. "Oh yeah," she said, touching her hair. "I showered at the gym," she added, still watching me. "I thought you said the showers there were gross," I said. She started to explain more about the gym and showers, but I had enough. I walked out the back door and went to Hilda's old place to tinker around. I could hear Brittany calling after me, but I ignored her. I worked until dark, thinking about how things had changed in our relationship. I knew she was lying, and I think she suspected that I knew. Something had to happen soon, but I wasn't sure what. 2 days later, I was still trying to figure out what to do. I knew Brittany was lying and probably seeing her ex-husband, Donovan. I just needed proof. I was in a bad mood, thinking about everything. I was on edge, with anger simmering below the surface. We were on a job outside of Redmond, and I needed to get some supplies. While waiting at a light, I saw what looked like Brittany's black car heading away from Redmond. As she passed, I saw it was Brittany, smiling happily, unaware of me. If I hadn't been in the far left turn lane, I would have followed her home and confronted her. Instead, I turned and headed straight to Donovan's office. My anger was white-hot, and I was lucky I didn't get a ticket. I skidded into the parking lot and jumped out of my truck without closing the door. The receptionist was alarmed as I stormed in. "Where is he?" I demanded. "Mr. Mims is on a conference call," she stammered, shocked by my aggressive attitude. I ignored her and marched to Donovan's office. She called after me, but I didn't stop. Donovan looked up in surprise as I burst in. He was on the phone, headset on. "Excuse me," he began, not recognizing me at first. "Tim," he said, realizing who I was. I grabbed his white shirt in anger, knocking him back in his chair. We wrestled on the floor, and I got one good hit on him before his superior size and strength took over. He held me in a bear hug, pinning my arms. "What's your problem, man?" he asked, both of us breathing heavily. "Stay away from my wife," I hissed, still struggling. He shoved me away and stared at me. "Brittany?" he said, confused. "Yeah, I know you've been seeing her," I claimed. "Look, Tim, I'm not sure what you've heard, but other than her working with Jan on the website, I haven't seen her," Donovan said. He seemed sincere, and I realized he wasn't lying. Feeling embarrassed and stupid, I got up. "Sorry, Donovan," I said as I quickly left. On the way home, I called Brittany. It went to voicemail, so I left a message, almost accusing her of lying and cheating. I told her we needed to have a serious talk about our marriage when I got home. But she wasn't there when I arrived. Whatever was happening seemed to be coming to a head. I was sure she had been doing something against our marriage vows, and I think she knew I knew. That's probably why she wasn't home. She wasn't ready for a confrontation. I tried to call her twice and texted her once, saying we needed to talk. I got no reply. The next day, I was less effective at the job site. It was a big project near Redmond. I was working with Roman and his crew. I messed up a few times and expected Roman to get angry, but he just watched me with concern. Finally, in the afternoon, Roman came up to me. "Go home," he said, not angrily but with concern. "Work out your problem. Come back with a clear head." I thought for a moment and realized he was right. I wasn't doing any good there. As I turned, he gave me a friendly pat on the shoulder. It was as if Roman sensed my troubled mood. I felt a warmth from him I had never experienced before. Despite my negative mindset, this flicker of compassion from Roman slightly brightened my dark mood. Driving home, I half expected Brittany to be there. I was mentally rehearsing what I would say to her, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. I wondered if our marriage could be saved. Was there some explanation for what had been going on? I thought it was Donovan, but now I knew it wasn't. When I arrived home, there was no sign of Brittany. I tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted, "Where are you? We need to talk. If you care about our marriage, call me." If that didn't get her attention, I wasn't sure what would. I sat on my front porch thinking about what I had done wrong. Was she playing the same game she did in college? Was there any way to save our marriage? As these thoughts swirled in my head, I heard a car drive up. I expected it to be Brittany, but it wasn't her black Subaru. Instead, a shiny white Audi sedan stopped in front of my house. Through the tinted windows, I couldn't see who was inside. To my surprise, out stepped Donovan. "Hey man, palms up, no wrestling, no fighting, okay?" he said with a half grin. "Donovan?" I said, surprised. "I'm sorry about yesterday, but what are you doing here now? How did you even know where I live?" "You forget I helped you refinance this place," he told me. "I just looked up your file," Donovan said as he walked up on the porch. I was confused by his arrival and still a little embarrassed about yesterday. I asked if he wanted water or a beer. "No, man, but I have some information for you," he said. "Okay," I said slowly, curious about what he might say. "Now don't shoot the messenger," he said, looking me in the eye. "But I got to thinking about Brittany after our tussle yesterday. I remembered seeing her around in the past month or so," Donovan added. I looked at him, signaling for him to continue. "I recall her hanging out with a guy who lives in my building. I never thought much about it because of who it was. I thought everything was above board. But after what you accused me of yesterday, I thought you and I needed to talk," Donovan said to me. "Who is it?" I demanded. He gave me a long look, paused, and then told me. "Your brother," he said. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Physically, I doubled over as 100 thoughts swirled through my brain, trying to find an innocent explanation for what Donovan had told me. Finally, I asked, "Did they look like they were affectionate?" He took a deep breath and said, "I'm not exactly sure how affectionate they were, but I know this. I wouldn't want my lady hanging on some guy like that without me knowing." I sat on my front porch, stunned. On one hand, I couldn't quite believe what Donovan was saying. Taylor wouldn't do that, would he? On the other hand, everything he said made some kind of twisted logic. I flashed back to Brittany and her bikinis in Hawaii and some of the looks he had given her. Even as self-absorbed as my brother was, I thought he would at least have the decency not to go after his own brother's wife. It sounded like I misjudged what an asshole he could be. "I guess things just don't change," Donovan said as he slowly shook his head. It took a minute for me to absorb his words. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean with Brittany," he said. I looked at him, trying to understand what he was telling me. He must have seen my confusion. "The reason she and I split up was over adultery," he told me. "Yes," I said. "But this time it was her that did it, not me." He stared at me, shaking his head. "No, you don't get it. It was Brittany that cheated on me. I loved her. I'd never do that. She broke my heart," Donovan told me. I had thought she said Donovan cheated on her, or had she just said the reason they split up was adultery, and I assumed it was him. "What happened?" I asked. Donovan told me about Brittany and the general manager of the local BMW dealership. She was doing their website and started working with the guy. He was married with 2 kids. Donovan said he became suspicious. Too many unexplained things were going on. "One night I followed them," he said. "I caught her with him in the parking lot at Table Rock State Park. I felt like killing the guy. I didn't, but I kicked his butt pretty good. Over time, I got over being pissed off at her, but I never trusted her again." Donovan got up to leave, gave me a bro hug, and told me to let him know if I needed anything. "That's why I drive the Audi. Can't stand to even look at BMW anymore," he told me as he walked back to his car. Deep in thought, I watched him drive off. My own brother, I thought. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got at both of them. Could something have happened in Hawaii? They were certainly together enough. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys and started driving to Taylor's apartment in Redmond. All those times she was supposed to be at Fitness Plus, she was probably with Taylor, I fumed. Partway there, my phone rang. It was my mother. I ignored it. A few minutes later, it rang again. Brittany. I quickly answered. "Where are you?" I barked into the phone. "Tim, it's your mother," my mom replied. "I've got Brittany's phone." "Where's Brittany?" I roared into the phone. "She's here. She's at the house. We have a problem we need to work out." "You need to come over so we can sort this out," my mom told me. "This is between Brittany, me, and my jerk brother," I yelled at her. "I know you're upset, but you don't need to use that tone with me, Timothy," she said. "We will figure this out. It's family business." I hung up. I didn't want to hear it. My phone rang again, probably my mom calling back. I ignored it and turned around, heading to my parents' house. What was Brittany doing there? I was lucky not to get a ticket on the way. Pulling up, I saw Brittany's Outback and Taylor's red truck. My anger boiled as I approached the house. My mom opened the door, standing between me, Brittany, and Taylor. "Now, Timothy," she began. "This is an unfortunate situation, but we can work it out." I looked at Brittany. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "How long have you been with this piece of trash?" I asked, nodding at Taylor. "Hey," Taylor objected. "I will not have that kind of language in my house," my mother added. "Shut up, Mom. You don't want foul language, but you allow these scum here," I shouted at her. "Did you cheat on me in Hawaii, or was it at Table Rock Park like with the BMW guy?" I spat at Brittany. She crumpled in tears. Taylor bent to help her. She tried to say she was sorry. My dad walked over and put his arm around my shoulder. "Now, son," he said, "this is a messy situation, but over time I think we can all get through this." "Dad, you need to step back right now or you might not like what I do next," I said, and he moved away. "This is more than a messy situation. My own brother betrayed me in the worst way, and you," I nodded at my mom, "are trying to sweep it under the rug." "Come on, Brittany," I began. "As your husband, at least for now, I think I deserve to know the details. How long have you been with this lazy piece of scum?" I asked. Brittany sat silently on the floor, tears streaming down her cheeks. Taylor stood next to her, gently patting her shoulder. "And you?" I pointed at Taylor. "I knew you had low morals, but this is really bad. Sleeping with your brother's wife? That's a new low." "All right," my mother declared. "Enough is enough. This will take time, but we, as a family, will get through this." I looked at the four of them, venom in my glare. Neither Brittany nor Taylor would look me in the eye. My mother stood calmly, as if in control, and my poor dad gazed at me with sadness. "You have until noon tomorrow to get your stuff out of my house," I told Brittany. "Tim, it's my house too," she said. "It's not your house," I bellowed. "I owned it long before I met you. I've checked with a lawyer." I hadn't. "You have no rights to my property." I walked out the door. I heard my dad call my name, but I ignored him and sped away, gravel churning under my tires. It was a long night. Sometimes I felt deep sadness about the end of my marriage, but mostly I was angry. Angry at Brittany, my soon-to-be ex-wife, and my parents, especially my mom, for siding with Taylor. But the deepest anger was for Taylor. My thoughts quickly turned to images of violence. I knew I had to control these feelings. I didn't want to end up in prison. The next day, I went to the job site out of habit. The crew gave me space. Even grouchy Roman seemed more compassionate. Apparently, the gossip had spread, and everyone knew about my crumbling marriage. That night, I saw that Brittany had taken most of her stuff from the house. It made me sad. I wanted her gone, but now it felt permanent. The next day, mid-morning, Roman handed me his phone. "Your mother needs to talk to you," he said. I listened. There was an issue with a job. The client had a question. My mom wanted me to handle it. "You are the head of the company. Handling client complaints is your salesman's job. Put your lazy son to work," I said and hung up. A few minutes later, Roman's phone rang again. He looked at me while talking. It was likely my mom. The next morning, Roman handed me the phone again, his expression different. This time it was Taylor. "Tim, hey," he said, acting normal. "On the Lancaster job, the client asked about treating the cedar. Apparently there was some, 'Don't call me again,' I said. 'As far as I'm concerned, you are dead to me.'" I hung up. Half an hour later, Roman brought me the phone again. "It's your mother," he said, covering the microphone. "You talked to her?" I shook my head. "No." He walked off, talking to my mother for a bit. Later, Roman came up to me. "Sit," he said, motioning to an overturned bucket. "You need to get away from this business," he told me. "Too much family problem for you." I thought about it and knew he was right. There was no way I could function in the family business when I couldn't even talk to most of my family. "I agree," I told Roman, "but I don't know what to do." He nodded and said, "I have an idea," and walked away, dialing numbers on his phone. About an hour later, he came back. "I have a nephew in Beaverton who has a business," Roman said. "A business like this," he gestured to the project we were on. "He needs help. I told him about you. Do you want to work with him? Run a crew?" he asked. We talked through the details. Roman also mentioned his niece, who was married with 2 small children. They were staying with him but looking for a house to rent. It sounded like mine would be perfect for them. I told him they'd have to take care of Muffin, the cat I inherited from Hilda. He agreed. For a moment, I looked at Roman differently. I'd always seen him as cranky and hard to like, but now I saw him as a friend, the kind of friend who helps you when you need it most. Later, I called Roman's nephew, Domikos, and we talked about the job. He basically offered me the job on the spot. I told him I'd like to meet him first and get a sense of the place. We set a time for that Friday. The more I thought about it, the idea of a fresh start appealed to me. I met Domikos and his crew, and my decision was solidified. He was a little older than me. His crews were happy and youthful. They did good work, were paid well, and were extremely busy. Domikos's father, Drayson, had a small garage apartment available to rent for a good price. Since I rented my house furnished to Roman's niece, I had little to fill the small garage apartment. It was perfect. I just had one more thing to do: resign from the family business. Even though I was technically a project manager at DOS, I did much more. Whenever there was a difficult client Taylor couldn't satisfy, I was called in. On big projects, I did the design and takeoffs. When there was a personnel problem, I worked through it. The family was going to miss all that, and I took a sadistic pleasure in thinking about how hard it would be on them once I was gone, especially Taylor and my mom. I decided to tell my parents Sunday evening. At first, I was going to email them a resignation letter, but I decided to do it in person, at least for my dad's sake. I pulled up to the family home at 4 p.m. Sunday afternoon. I saw Taylor's truck parked at my parents' house. Uncharacteristically, I knocked on the front door. My dad answered. "What are you doing, knocking?" he said with a big grin, putting his arm over my shoulder. "Timothy," my mom greeted me with delight. "Oh, good. I'm glad you're here. Dinner will be ready in about an hour." My brother poked his head out through the kitchen door. I saw Brittany standing timidly behind him. "Bro," he said, as if all were good between us. "Sorry, but I won't be staying for dinner," I told them. "I just came here to give you this." I handed a sheet of paper to my mom. "It's my resignation," I explained. "Now, Timothy," my mom began, using all her persuasive skills to try to change my mind. My dad chimed in about how important I was to the business. Even Taylor wandered out and tried to appeal to me. "Look, man, I'm really sorry about everything that went on with Brittany," he shrugged. "These things just happen sometimes." "Do not talk to me or ever mention that woman's name to me," I said, pointing directly at Brittany. "Hey," Taylor said, giving my shoulder a shove. "Don't talk to her that way." Even I didn't realize the level of rage I was barely containing, but his shove erupted that anger. I wheeled on Taylor and hit him square in the face. He collapsed, nose spewing blood. I'd likely broken it. For a moment, everything froze, and then all at once, my mom was yelling at me. Brittany rushed to Taylor, and my dad asked why I'd hit my own brother. I ignored them all and left. The next day, I packed up my truck and left for Beaverton. It didn't take long to get into the rhythm of their business. Most of the guys were Eastern European. They were smart, quick, and skillful. I did less crew leading and more hands-on construction with them. We built some great projects, and it was a fun, business-like atmosphere. On Fridays, the guys would invite me to drink beer with them after work. Many of the crew had side jobs on Saturday, but Sunday was reserved for football, not American football, but what we call soccer. I had played a little soccer in high school, and I liked it. They invited me to play with their club, and as good as I thought I was, These guys were much better. My anger toward Brittany and my family always simmered, but I didn't dwell on it as much as I had at first. I had virtually no contact with my family other than answering an occasional email from my dad. I didn't blame him much. I knew my mom ran things in our family. My brother and my mother were different. My brother's betrayal was extreme and blatant. Taylor was always so self-absorbed, only thinking of himself, but to go after his own brother's wife. My mom's acknowledgement of his wrongdoing and quick sweep of the sin under the rug was almost worse than Brittany. She was a lot like Taylor. She wanted what she wanted and went for it. Someday, perhaps, I'll be strong enough to find out how and when their relationship started. I have to admit, I was curious. All these thoughts were never far from the surface, but with my new friends and co-workers, I dwelled on them less. Another new relationship I had was a bit surprising. I'd become friends with Donovan. Every few weeks, he'd call and we'd talk about anything except Brittany. A couple of times when he traveled to Portland, we got together for a drink, including one wild night with the Eastern Europeans. Occasionally, I'd get a brief email from Roman. Reading between the lines, it sounded like my old family business, Designed Outdoor Spaces, was having some problems. Time passed, weeks turned into months, and then I realized I'd been gone for over a year. I enjoyed working for Domino's, but I knew this couldn't last forever. One day on the job, my mom tried to call me. I ignored it like I usually did. She called again, and I didn't answer. An hour later, Roman called. "Timothy," he said, "it's Frank, your papa. He had a heart attack. Your father has gone to heaven." I sat down on a pile of lumber trying to process the news. My dad had died. Later, I learned he had a massive heart attack and died instantly at a job site before they could get him to the hospital. The services were on Sunday. I felt sad and guilty for shutting him out of my life. I drove over on Saturday. Though I still wouldn't speak to my brother, I planned a temporary truce with my mom. The service was at my parents' house. As I drove up, I noticed the place looked run down, which was surprising. My parents usually kept everything up. I hugged my mom, but ignored my brother's attempt at a greeting. He didn't have the usual happy-go-lucky attitude, and Brittany had gained back the weight she lost, maybe more. During the reception, Roman pulled me aside. "You come home now," he said, not asking or requesting. "Roman," I said, "I'm not working with him again," nodding towards my mom and brother in the other room. No, start a new business," Roman said. He told me he couldn't work with Taylor anymore due to too many customer complaints. He wanted to start his own business and wanted me involved. I was interested but said, "Let's not discuss this here. We'll talk tomorrow morning." And we did. It took a couple of weeks to set everything up. It was tough to say goodbye to Omos and the guys, but they understood. Once we got our name out, business began to grow. We called it Boucher Designs, partly to honor my dad's original business. About half the old crew from DOS joined us. My mom left me an angry voicemail accusing me of stealing her employees. I reconnected with subcontractors and suppliers from my DOS days. Everyone welcomed Roman and my new business. I heard many negative comments about DOS's direction. Since Roman's niece still lived in my house, I rented an apartment in Donovan's building. This let me hang out with Donovan more often. I met his fiancée, Lisa, a beautiful girl from Madras. She was athletic, nice, and devoted to Donovan. Now that I was back in Central Oregon, the estrangement with my family grew. My slight contact with my mom stopped now that we were competitors. We heard disparaging comments about us, knowing who spread them. We lost several jobs due to the negative talk, and then the comments got personal. People gossiped about how I couldn't keep my woman and how satisfied Brittany was now, implying things about me. One night I was at a bar with friends. We were having a good time when I noticed Taylor, Brittany, and some others on the opposite side. "Hey man, I'm going to take off," I told my buddies, glancing at Taylor and Brittany. My strategy was to avoid them. Cody, one of my friends, said, "Finish your beer. Don't let them run you off." He was right. I decided to leave after my drink. That was a mistake. They must have noticed me. I heard louder than necessary comments, my name called, and then laughter. I took my last sip and was getting ready to leave when Taylor, Brittany, and their friends wandered over. "Hey man, clear out," Cody said to Taylor. "I'm just here to say hello to my little brother," Taylor said, emphasizing little. "Hello, Timmy. Are you doing okay?" He knew I hated being called Timmy. "Buzz off, Taylor," I said. Now! That's not very polite to say to family, he mocked, turning to Brittany. Well, you know how sensitive he can be, Brittany said in a sing-song voice. Buzz off, Brittany, I said softly. Hey, Taylor said aggressively, shoving my shoulder. What's poor little Timmy going to do now? Brittany added, getting laughs from their group. I turned toward Brittany, the woman I had loved and married. Now she was just a stranger. Had she always been like this, or had Taylor corrupted her, I wondered. Screw you! I angrily lashed out at Brittany. Then I felt a crushing blow to the side of my head and everything went black. When I came to, I saw some shuffling activity around me. As I tried to sit up, my brother gave me one last kick to my gut before he and his crowd exited to the street. Later, my friends told me what happened after I called Brittany a 304. Taylor had cold-cocked me. My buddies jumped in to protect me, which turned into a 30-second barroom brawl. No one but I noticed the cheap shot kick from Taylor as the fight was winding down. Any slight chance our family would unite was severed. As far as I was concerned, Taylor was the enemy. Brittany, too. I hated Taylor. No, it wasn't just dislike. I truly hated him. He betrayed his own brother in the worst possible way and showed no remorse. Yes, I hated him and wished him great harm. This anger would flicker occasionally, but mostly I tried to keep the negative thoughts down and focus on positive things like our business. Our business continued to grow despite negative rumors. DOS was having problems, which helped our growth. Several weeks later, out of the blue, I got a call from Carlton Eldridge, an attorney we had done some work for when I was with the family business. I'd spent some time with Eldridge after work a few times and enjoyed his company. Tim, he said, I didn't realize you were no longer working with your family. No, a few months ago I went out on my own, I told him. I wish I'd known that, he said. I decided to do my own thing. It seemed like the right move at the time. Well, Carlton said, I have a problem that I wonder if you could help me with. Okay, I will if I can, I said. What's going on? Carlton told me he sold the house I had worked on and built a new, beautiful home on Timber Butte. I knew this area of upscale homes. The ones built on the ridge had sweeping western views of Mount Bachelor and the Three Sisters Mountains. We hired DOS to build our deck. They did such a good job for us last time. It's cantilevered over the ridge and will have spectacular sightlines to the Cascades, he said. The problem is, I'm beginning to think this project is over their head. I'm not even sure the structure is safe, he added. I envisioned the type of structure he described. We had done these types of big, off-the-ground projects, but it was always very slow and steady. We all tied off for safety when working at this height. Roman and I were always on site for this kind of challenging construction. I had a difficult time imagining the present-day staff having the expertise to build something like this. What is it, Carlton, you'd like me to do? I asked. He asked if I would come by, take a look at the work done so far, and give my opinion. Normally, I would never critique another contractor's work, but as far as I was concerned, there were few ethical rules when dealing with my family at this point. Sure, I said. He told me Taylor was scheduled to come out on Thursday to look at his concerns and asked if I could come by on Wednesday. I agreed. Pulling up to the large, contemporary new home, you couldn't really appreciate the view until you entered the house. It was spectacular. Carlton greeted me warmly and seemed genuinely appreciative of my help. Here, let me show you what's going on, Carlton said. We walked out on the partially built deck. I immediately noticed they were using an expensive high-end composite deck product and an aluminum stainless steel cable railing system. That part was nice, but the workmanship was poor. There were several pieces of small blue tape on the deck and rail, markers to show problem areas Carlton had identified. Carlton started across the deck to show me something, and I grabbed him. Carlton, I said, this is not safe. Your entry door to the deck should be caution taped off. We both looked down. The deck was at least 30 feet off the ground. The view was spectacular, but in its present condition, the deck was dangerous. From a distance, Carlton began to tell me his concerns, pointing out the different tape markers and his various questions. I took notes. I surveyed the job, and it looked like something Taylor was involved with, sloppy, taking shortcuts as if they were in a hurry. Just then, Carlton's phone buzzed. I apologize, Tim. This is New York. I've got to take this, he told me. I nodded. No problem. I began to study the deck in detail. There were several things from a construction aesthetic that were wrong, sloppy work. But then I noticed the framing that hadn't yet gotten deck boards on it. Wow, this was way off. I took out my tape measure and measured one joist spacing. It was nearly 21 inches on center. The maximum it should be is 16 inches, and probably for a job like this, 12 inches. I could see why he spaced it like this. He was once again cutting a corner, trying to save time and money. Very poor workmanship. Then I noticed one of the composite boards lying laterally across the 21-inch span. If someone were to try and walk across that board, it would break. Unlike wood, the composite is not structural. That's why the on-center distance is narrower. I stopped. I thought for a few minutes. I glanced back at the house. No sign of Carlton. I had a brief mental debate with myself, and then I remembered the cheap shot kick in the stomach from Taylor at the bar. I made up my mind. With a quick glance back at the house and seeing no sign of Carlton, I moved. I grabbed one of the small pieces of blue tape. I carefully walked on the framing out to the far edge of the deck. I placed the blue tape on the outer edge and then moved back to solid ground. I laid the composite board laterally across a wide gap in the framing, aimed at the blue tape marker. The board spanned over 30 inches and would collapse if someone walked on it. Looking around at the mess on the deck, I knew no one would notice what I had done. If I knew my brother, he'd be in a hurry to cover things up at the job site. He'd likely take a shortcut and step on that board, which would be disastrous. Waiting for Carlton, I questioned myself. Was this too harsh? Should I move the board? I looked down at the rocky terrain 30 feet below. I almost decided to move it when Carlton returned. Sorry about that, he apologized. So, what do you think? There are some problems here, for sure, I told Carlton. But I think they can be fixed. I'd ask your contractor to examine your concerns and provide a plan to resolve them. I couldn't bring myself to say my brother's name. Carlton nodded silently and looked at the partially built structure. I'd appreciate it if you don't mention I was here, I asked. And if you don't get satisfactory answers, my crew would be glad to fix this for you. Finally, do not go out on that deck in its current condition. Thank you, Carlton said, shaking my hand. If there's ever anything I can do for you, legally or as a friend, let me know, Tim. On my drive back to Redmond, I felt nervous. Had I set up my own brother's death? Did I care? Did I feel guilty? After thinking it over, I answered myself. Probably no, and not really. But that evening, I needed company. I didn't want to be alone with my dark thoughts. I called Donovan. Hey, Donovan, what are you up to tonight? I asked. Tonight? He replied hesitantly. Well, Lisa was coming over and we... Never mind, I interjected. You're busy, I get it. No, actually, he began. This might work out. Me, Lisa, and her little sister Val are going to Tacos Por Favor for dinner. Let's meet there at 7 o'clock. See you then. He hung up. I met them that evening and got a warm hug from Lisa. She was different from Brittany. Not flashy, but beautiful in an understated way, and she seemed devoted to Donovan. Hi, I'm Valeria, the little sister introduced herself, shaking my hand with a big grin. Val had the same exotic look as Lisa, but she was shorter and curvier. They both had bright smiles that made you want to smile, too. We had a nice, casual dinner with a slight feel of a blind date. At the end of the evening, I got a hug from Lisa and a handshake from Val. I hadn't been on a date since Brittany and I split up, but I enjoyed spending time with Val. The next day, Thursday, I was on the job site when Donovan called. Well, you made a good impression, he said. What are you talking about? I smiled, but I knew what he meant. Donovan told me that Val liked me and had asked him a bunch of questions about me. She was surprised to learn we both had been married to the same person. Val had just gone through a messy breakup with her boyfriend of over a year. I'm going to give you her number, Donovan said. But please treat her well. Be honest. Don't lead her on. I told him I understood and wanted to get to know her better. I promised to treat her respectfully. The rest of the day, I thought about Valeria. Things were starting well. That night, I called her and asked if she'd like to go hiking on Saturday. She accepted, and we had a pleasant conversation while making plans for the hike. Thoughts of Taylor and Carlton's deck were nearly forgotten. By Friday midday, I had heard nothing. Maybe my trap didn't work. I wondered if I would hear anything at all. The last thing I could do was ask. If something bad happened, I wanted to be far away from suspicion. I picked Val up at her apartment in Madras, and we drove to Painted Rock's natural area, about 30 miles northeast of Redmond and out of cell service. We hiked for a few hours, and Val kept up with me, barely out of breath even on the steeper parts. I noticed a toughness about her that I liked. She checked a lot of boxes for me. Fun to talk to, great-looking, and tough. We stopped for a picnic lunch and returned to the car around 4 p.m. As soon as we hit cell service, my phone started blowing up with missed calls and texts. I had 3 missed calls, 2 from my mom and 1 from Roman. I also had a text. Nervously, I began to speculate on the messages. Val must have noticed my reaction. "Tim," she said, "do you want to stop and check your messages?" "Are you okay?" she asked. "No, it's okay," I said and smiled at her. "Well, whatever it is, it's not worth getting in a wreck over. Keep your eyes on the road," she told me, her voice sweet but serious. "Yes, ma'am," I replied, and saw a small smile spread across her face. As we got closer to town, I grew more anxious about the messages. I asked Val if she wanted to get a beer at the corner saloon, a cowboy bar on the highway. "Sure, let's stop," she said. Once inside and after ordering, I told her I needed to step outside and check my messages. She nodded. I listened to my mom's message nervously. "Tim, your brother has been in an accident. We are at the hospital. Please come as soon as you can," she said, her voice strained. I then called Roman. He confirmed he had spoken to my mom and that Taylor had fallen at a job site and was in serious condition. We talked for a few more minutes, but Roman didn't have more details. I texted my mom. "I will be there as soon as I can." I stood in the dusty parking lot for a moment. I couldn't tell if I felt bad or not. If anything, I felt nervous. Deep inside, I felt some remorse for my part in Taylor's accident. But that guilt quickly faded when I thought about how Taylor had treated me and my marriage. I wondered if there was any way to trace anything back to me. As I walked back into the saloon, I noticed a cowboy chatting up Val. "Excuse me," I said, shouldering past the cowboy with a slight bump as I slid into the booth. "Sorry," I said to Val, ignoring the cowboy. "There's been a family emergency. That's what the messages were about," I told Val. "Friend," the cowboy addressed me. "I was talking to the lady here, and I don't think I care for your manners." He had an edge in his voice. I still had some bottled-up rage inside me, but I needed to handle this correctly or risk sabotaging any future with Val. I took a deep breath, gave Val a look, and stood up. The guy was a few inches taller and about 10 years older. "Friend," I said, using his term deliberately, "my girl and I just stopped in for a drink. She's not interested in you, and I'm certainly not either. Now, we've got 2 choices. We can go out to the parking lot, and I'm pretty sure I'll beat the daylights out of you, or you can go back to whatever corral you came from." Friend. I gave him my most intimidating stare from my wrestling days. He looked at me, and for a moment I thought he might challenge me. But then I smiled at him. His eyebrows raised, his eyes glanced side to side, and then he silently turned and walked away. I sat back down and looked at Val. "If you'd fought that man, this would have been our last date," she told me. I was pretty sure it wasn't going to come to that, I told her, but I really don't want this to be our last date. "Well, then you better be on your best behavior," she said with a serious look. "Message received," I said. We had our drinks, and I told her I needed to get back to town because of the family emergency. Val glanced at me as if to ask what was going on, but I remained silent. "Someday, and I hope it will be soon, we'll have a long talk about my family, but it's too soon to dump that baggage on our relationship," I said. Driving to the hospital, I thought about my mom, Taylor, and my ex-wife, Brittany. I had little compassion for my family, but I wanted information about Taylor's accident. That was my goal for the hospital visit. To boost my spirits, I relived the passionate goodbye kiss from Val, which brought a smile to my face. At the hospital, I finally found my mom and Brittany. I hugged my mom, but when Brittany approached me for a hug, I held up my hand to stop her. "What happened?" I asked my mom. "Taylor was at a job site and had an accident," she said. She described the Eldridge deck. I said nothing, just listened, even though I knew the setting. A board gave way. Taylor was able to temporarily grab a piece of framing, but then slipped off and fell over 20 feet onto the rocky terrain. He fell on his back. "He's paralyzed from the waist down," my mom told me. The doctors say he will never walk again." With that, my mom broke into tears. I hugged her, feeling no remorse or sympathy. "Do you want to see him?" she asked. "No thanks, Mom," I told her. "I've got to go," I added. My mom stared at me in disbelief. "Tim, this is Taylor, your brother. He's been hurt badly. Aren't you concerned about him?" she asked. "I know this is Taylor, the man who destroyed my marriage, and no, I am not concerned, even if he dies," I told her. Then I turned and left. Over Brittany's sobbing, I heard my mom admonishing me for my lack of sympathy. It didn't slow me down. One ramification I began to think about was how Taylor's accident would affect their business. I knew the setup. Taylor would bid the jobs and project manage their crews. The laborers still left would provide the labor. With Taylor injured, it could be weeks or months before he could contribute. I wondered what they would do. Over the next few weeks, our request for bids increased. It didn't take a genius to understand that DOS was not able to bid new jobs with Taylor out. Roman and I agreed not to hire any more of the existing DOS crew. That would truly be like kicking someone while they were down. A few weeks later, I got a message from my mom. She said she had a business proposition for me. Out of curiosity, I agreed to meet her. We met at a Starbucks. My mom, always the professional, was dressed like she was heading to a board meeting, complete with file folders and a laptop. "Tim," she began, "I have a proposition for you. I think there could be great value for both our companies if we consider a merger. I'd even be open to selling part of DOS to you. Let me show you the numbers." She handed me some data and showed me their top-line revenue and trends over the past few years. I noticed that ever since Roman and I started our business, their sales had dropped. My mom probably thought I wouldn't understand the information due to my dyslexia. After a few minutes, I handed the data back. "What exactly are you thinking?" I asked. She went on about the value of DOS based on historical sales data and assets. I wasn't really listening. I didn't want anything to do with DOS or my family. Finally, she stopped talking. "No thanks," I told her. She sputtered and asked why. Then she started lowering her asking price. When I didn't change my mind, she began to insult me. "Do I have to spell it out for you?" she asked angrily. "Your brother would understand this immediately. I can't believe you don't get it." I stood up. "Your company has no value," I told her calmly. "Your market reputation has tanked. I try hard to disassociate my name from DOS. I wouldn't take over your company even if you gave it to me for free." Then I left. Our business continued to grow, and we were booked out for nearly 12 months. When demand exceeds supply, prices rise, so we raised our prices. We paid our employees well, and Roman and I made good money. Plus, we built nice projects. 2 months later, I got an unusual letter from Pacific Trust Bank. It was confusing, and my reading handicap made it worse. But I understood enough to know it was important. A thought occurred to me, and the more I considered it, the more I liked it. The next day, I called Carlton Eldridge, hinting at needing a favor he had promised me. The following day, I delivered the document to him. He called and asked me to meet the next afternoon. Carlton explained that Pacific Trust was the bank my family had used and acted as the trust administrator for our family property. My grandfather had set it up so a family member could buy the land at 50% of its appraised value if it went up for sale. Because of this, the bank could only loan against 50% of its value. The current appraised value of the land with structures was $2.95 million. My mom had borrowed $1.5 million against it on behalf of DOS, so the land was no longer owned by my mom. If no family member bought it at 50% of the value, it would go on the general market at full price. Carlton said, "If you want to buy that land at half its value, you can, and it will be 100% yours." "But I'd have to come up with $1.5 million, I said. He nodded. All named parties, me, my mom, and my brother, had the option to buy at the reduced value. The bank needed an answer within 60 days. "Tim," Carlton advised, "if there's any way you can get the money, you should do this." "I agree," I said, but I had more motives than just profit. I thanked Carlton, and he pledged his legal counsel pro bono. My next call was to Donovan. We discussed my house downtown and the land I owned. After some quick math, I figured I could sell my house and the land for $1 million. I had just under $200,000 in savings. I would need to borrow $300,000 collateralized by the land. My mortgage would be less than my rent, and I'd own the land. Donovan said he could get me a loan for the full $1.5 million even before I sold my house and land. He said he could close the loan within 30 days at just under 3% interest. I called Carlton, and we met with the bank, armed with Donovan's loan documents. I signed what felt like over 100 documents. I didn't read any of them, trusting Carlton to watch out for me. Through this process, Carlton and I became friends. I couldn't have done this without his and Donovan's help. During this time, I didn't hear from my family. Good, I thought. But I knew that would change soon. I took possession of the property on the 15th of the month, about 3 weeks away. The bank had been in touch with my mom, but had no information on her plans. The bank thought since it was a family matter, we could handle the change of possession amicably. They had no idea about our family dynamics. 2 weeks before I was to take possession, I texted my mom, asking to meet. She agreed. I asked to have the meeting at her house. I didn't know if she realized it would soon be my house. I hadn't seen any of them since she tried to merge our businesses. It had been months since I last saw Taylor before the accident. As I pulled up, I noticed the shiny red pickup truck parked in front. I couldn't help but compare it to the beat-up truck that I drove. I just shook my head. "Good to see you, Tim," my mother said. I gave her the briefest of hugs. I noticed Taylor in a motorized wheelchair trying hard to pull off his confident, arrogant look. It wasn't really working. "Bro," he said. I just nodded back. I saw Brittany in the kitchen. She glanced out as I walked in but didn't speak to me. "So, is this a social call?" my mother asked. "No, it's business today," I said. "Oh," my mother said, surprised. "Go on." "On the 15th of this month, I will take possession of this land, the buildings, and of course this house," I told them. There was a silent pause. "That's not possible," my mother finally said. "Your grandfather has it in a trust. The bank takes care of that," she added. I then told her about the letter from Pacific Trust and the terms of the collateralized loan. I explained that the family trust allowed a family member to buy the land if it came up for sale for 50% of its appraised value. "But we don't owe that much on this land," she objected. "I haven't taken out a loan against the property in months. How can that be?" She looked around, searching for an answer. All of a sudden, all eyes were on Taylor. "You didn't borrow any money, did you?" she asked her favorite son. "I just needed a new pickup with handicap controls," he whined. "They get expensive with all those accessories." My mom just shook her head. "I will go down to the bank tomorrow and work this out," she claimed with certainty. "Mom," I quietly said, "it's done. I've already signed all the documents. As of the 15th, this is mine." I stood silently. Rage filled her eyes. "Get out!" She pointed to the door. "You've betrayed this family and turned your back on our business. Get out of my house." I left, but I knew I'd be back. A week later, I received a humble phone call from my mom. It sounded like the reality of the situation had been explained to her by the bankers. "Tim," my mom quietly said, "I'm hoping you can give me a couple of days to work out where I'm going to live. Can you do that for me?" she asked. I was quiet for a minute and finally said, "Sure." She thanked me. I told her I had an idea. I suggested she could move into the small, run-down cottage on the property down by the shop. "Are you serious?" she asked. "That dump isn't big enough for the three of us," she added. "Okay, just thought I'd offer," I told her. 2 hours later, she called back and said she'd take my offer on the cottage. It only had 1 bedroom, 1 bath, a cramped kitchen, and a small living room. I wasn't sure what the three of them would do, but it wasn't my problem. 2 weeks later, I moved into the main house, my parents' old house. I immediately started remodeling. I wanted to exorcise the negativity of my family from my house. Over the winter, I remodeled the kitchen and 2 of the bathrooms. That spring, I had a buddy in the swimming pool business build us a pool. It sat out on the side yard overlooking the grounds and the tiny cottage where my family lived. Every time they walked out their door, they saw my large house on the hill with my swimming pool. One spring day, I pulled into the roadway leading up to my house and noticed Taylor sitting in his wheelchair in the cramped side yard of the rundown cottage. Normally, I would ignore him, but this time I stopped. I got out of the truck and went over to him. "Taylor," I said, "I was on a job site and I was thinking of you today." He smiled up at me. Even handicapped, he still believed the world revolved around him. "Oh, yeah?" He smiled at me. "Yeah, I was wondering about your accident," I told him, wondering what actually happened. He took a deep breath and said, "There was a defective piece of decking that broke as I stepped on it and I fell." "You weren't trying to walk out to a piece of blue tape and cross a wide joist gap, were you?" I asked. "Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was." "Hey, how did you know that?" he asked. I just tilted my head, palms up in a "how should I know" gesture, and moved to go back to my truck. "You son of a bitch!" he screamed. "You set me up! I'm calling the police! I'll get you!" He cursed at me. I stopped, walked back, and squatted so I was at eye level with him. "No matter what happened, there's nothing you can prove," I said. "But just know this, every time I'm at my house or up at my pool with my girlfriend and we're having fun together, you're here living with your mother and your fat girlfriend in this dump, in a wheelchair with no feeling below your waist." I smiled. "Just remember that," I said as I walked away. That's kind of the end of a long story. Val and I are still together, but it will be a while before I get married again. That's probably a whole different story by itself. Brittany did put on some weight. I never see her out back at the cottage anymore. I assume she moved out of the small house on my property. She never had been terribly loyal, something I learned far too late. Some people think I let my mother and my brother live on my property out of the goodness of my heart. That wasn't quite true. I'm not that nice a guy. The real reason was payback. Throughout most of my life, I was unfavorably compared to my brother. He was always better in school, more popular, and a better athlete. My mom never let me forget that. Whenever she looked at me, I felt overshadowed by my more accomplished brother. Now it's my turn to point the mirror their way. The family business filed for bankruptcy protection. Taylor's fancy truck was repossessed. My ex-wife has now left town. Taylor and my mom live alone. There are times when I pass by their house. Every time I drive by, I make sure to honk twice. Thanks for listening to One Infidelity Hit. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop us a like.